Chapter 330. The internal battle of the wood spirits are so cute. Mercenary group ended in just 5 minutes. My undead army now had 4 new, elite modified undead. Don't misunderstand, I didn't kill them, nor was there a need to. I simply told them that I was carrying out a special mission given to me by the wood spirits, and that I was gathering information as an undead mage, and they believed me. Yep, they instantly believed me without any hesitation. They then tried to blackmail me by saying, "You must have a lot of justice points. As a righteous holy knight, you absolutely can't keep your justice points for yourself. Let's all share in the good fortune and do this mission together." And then I casually said a few words to them, and they voluntarily joined me. This rotten meat is so disgusting. His entire body was covered in pink pieces of meat. Coupled with my specially prepared makeup techniques, the barbarian Jen had now transformed into a reeking abomination zombie. He had a rotting backbone, stinking rotten meat, and a fat lower body that was so poor that he didn't even wear pants. His intestines were hanging outside. His chin was misconnected, and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth as he walked. He was the perfect abomination zombie. Actually, according to my job class, I should have disguised myself as an elegant blood tribe member. Under the cover of night, I should have walked on rooftops and in the shadows, using my dagger to harvest the lives of assassins from the Thief Guild. Elegant? Also, why does this rooftop battle scene sound so familiar? Are you talking about that legendary novel called Assassin? Yep, back in the day, I chose to become a thief precisely because I read that book. He kept nodding, and I felt like I was being scammed more and more. I was hesitating whether or not I should tell him that that novel was also a product of mine back in the day. It was filled with all sorts of logical errors, but since it was so fun, it mysteriously became very popular. If I really followed the main character's lifestyle and became a handsome thief, dying 100 times in a single year would be nothing. But as I looked at his honest smile, I couldn't help but sigh at how tough he was to still be alive. I also felt that it would be better not to ruin his worldview. Yep, I definitely didn't feel like it would be troublesome if he got angry out of embarrassment. Is your dream to become a high-flying burglar? Considering this guy's size and weight, I felt that if he really did jump from roof to roof like a main character in a novel, he wouldn't have to consider how hidden he was, but rather how sturdy the building was. What if, in the middle of the night, a gigantic creature suddenly pierced through the ceiling and fell from the sky with a deafening roar? Yep, I definitely didn't try it, nor did I get stuck in the ceiling. When he thought about this big guy being sandwiched between the ceiling and the floor, he suddenly felt very excited. Perhaps he could let him try it next time. It would be best if he wore a red cotton padded jacket and a big beard. If he was discovered, he could still. I am Santa Claus. Only good children can receive my gifts. What? Is it summer? I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. That damn gnome compass is too unreliable. That stupid unicorn didn't even know to warn me. I actually flew to the wrong hemisphere. Cough, cough. I seem to have gotten distracted again. Let's get back to the main topic. This was my personal collection of a complete, evil-increasing appearance gift pack, which was perfect for powerful warriors. It was cool and practical, and its thick, rotting flesh and protruding eyeballs could even increase one's charm toward banshees. Roland, let's have a nice private chat later. I feel like you have some misunderstandings about banshees. All right then, it seemed that I had accidentally said something bad about banshees in front of the person in question. When I thought about how this former banshee queen was becoming more and more adept at meowing, licking, and meowing, I meant how felines usually pounced, bit, and swept their tails, I really needed to seriously consider how to explain this. Cough. I seem to have gotten distracted again. Let's get back to the main topic. Thanks to my undead skin pack's disguise, the wood spirits are so cute team. Yep, the newly formed wood spirits, mother, love team. No, the newly formed wood spirits are so cute team no longer had any semblance of a living person. The previously mentioned Jen was wearing an abomination outfit, and the priest Betty was wearing a cape to summon shadows, pretending to be a shadow priest who offered sacrifices to the death god. The handsome elven traveling bard was disguised as an equally handsome blood tribe member, and he even applied some blood-red disguise on himself. The valiant dwarf Annie was still a domineering dwarf Annie. This really couldn't be blamed on my lack of makeup skills. I couldn't think of a more suitable way to disguise a barrel-sized body that weighed over 100 kilograms, but was less than 4 meters tall as an undead with only rotting flesh and skeletons. If she was also disguised as an abomination, then only an undead mage with an abnormal brain would create such a miniature undead monster. Blood Tribe? A true Blood Tribe member would probably cry for a Blood Tribe member with such a body. Of course, in the end, I still managed to find a way to disguise her as an overweight ghoul. Although she still had the short and stocky build unique to dwarves, if other undead mages were to see her, they would only think that she was a dwarf who had transformed into a ghoul and that something had gone wrong during the transformation. Of course, the prerequisite was that this Annie was willing to put down her wine barrel. Which corpse ghoul would carry such a large wine barrel on its back? From time to time, it would even secretly scoop up a cup or two to satisfy its cravings. However, I knew that it would be impossible to convince it to put down its luggage. Wasn't there a saying, making a dwarf put down his wine glass is as impossible as making an elf give up their art and pride? What a pity. My skin gift packs are all masterpieces, and they're free products of conscience. These fellows really don't know what's good for them. Sooner or later, I'll find a bad merchant who's good at scamming noobs and scam them. All they need to do is wear a hat and a pair of glasses, along with some random gifts, and sell it as a new skin gift pack. How could they have any conscience? Don't be so calculative. It's already good enough that they're willing to help. Don't be so calculative. All right then, although this group of scammers didn't seem to be that strong individually, at least I didn't need to divert my attention to control them. They could still be added to my combat strength. Of course, due to certain reasons, I also slightly distanced myself from them. A spy? It's possible for the undead to plant a spy among the living. When I mentioned the information I just received, everyone's astonishment wasn't fake at all. In the minds of ordinary people, and even most adventurers, the undead were a group of wild beasts that were impossible to communicate with. They would actively attack everything before them. How could such an existence possibly plant a spy among the living? Perhaps it should be said that even if they became a spy for these bloodthirsty undead, what could they possibly obtain? Of course, this also meant that most of the adventurers in this adventuring group were still noobs. The Shiloh Empire had many spies in the human kingdoms. For nobles who possessed authority and wealth, their greatest enemy was death. Asking them to cultivate and advance in power level to increase their lifespan would be the equivalent of killing them. Undead conversion rituals were probably the easiest way to achieve immortality. Even if they weren't satisfied with an ugly undead body, there were still elegant Blood Tribe members as an alternative. And if they still wanted to walk under the sun, absorbing other people's life force, blood sacrifices, and other such evil rituals would also satisfy their needs. It wasn't only the corrupt nobles. Veteran adventurers who had lost their future because they were crippled, old people who had been stuck at a bottleneck for more than 10 years, or magical geniuses who were born with darkness or undead elements would all be able to obtain many benefits from the undead. Not only was this true for the Shiloh Empire, it was the same for the Yonya Empire back in the day. Every day, the living would come to join the undead of their own volition. There would be powerful individuals who cultivated darkness, curses, and other undead elements. There were also those who were simply dark villains. That sounds really cool. If it was the former, I would happily add them to the cannon fodder faction. If they could prove their own abilities by surviving, I would also make an equivalent exchange with them. If it was the latter, I would also add them to the cannon fodder faction. It was just that they would have to undergo an undead conversion beforehand. Even if they were undead, they would still be undead, even if they were transformed into ghouls. At the very least, they would be able to discuss their enemies. Facing the astonishment of these brats, I hesitated for a moment and organized my words before saying, "What can you obtain? It's probably far more than you can imagine. For example, power and an endless lifespan. As long as you're willing to pay a small price, it'll be far faster than cultivating step by step. After all, many times, if you don't care about the consequences, the path of evil will be far faster than the path of righteousness. I didn't say anything else as I looked at everyone's contemplative expressions. Reality would always be cruel. Rather than blindly believing that all other adventurers were your companions, it would be better to save on this tuition fee and make necessary preparations beforehand. Soon, I received the information I was hoping for from my new servant, the skeleton mage Cougar, a short, cloaked individual with a dark green, snake-shaped dagger. He has an aura of darkness. His left leg is slightly lame, and he seems to be injured. I looked towards my teammates inquisitively. After all, compared to me who had just arrived here, they should be far more familiar with the adventurers here. Some of them then looked up at the sky, while others checked their weapons. However, not a single one of them replied. It was obvious that these people were unreliable, or perhaps they had no interest in other adventurers at all, nor did they try to collect information on other adventurers. I could only helplessly shake my head as I accepted the letter that Cougar handed me. From a certain standpoint, this was quite ironic. The undead had placed a spy among the living, but had mistakenly given important information to the spy the living had placed among the undead. The yellow envelope was quite light. It seemed like an ordinary letter had been sealed with red beeswax. It seemed that it could be opened with a single tear. However, judging from the faint magical waves coming from the envelope, there was also a common little mechanism hidden within. If the recipient didn't know the normal way to open the envelope and casually opened it, the envelope would self-destruct. The person who had set up this little mechanism would also know about it. However, such a little mechanism was meaningless to me. I lightly tapped on the envelope, and a small piece of ice sealed the envelope. The absolute zero ice, which would bring eternal slumber, sent this mechanism into eternal slumber as well. When I tore open the envelope, I saw that the letter was nothing but a boring digital account book. It seemed that this was a common digital password that would only require deciphering against various secret code books. Although it would be possible to decipher it if I spent some time, and I'd faintly learned how to decipher it, but I recall that you've never even passed your secret code deciphering in basic mathematics. That's right. Even back in the day at the Cloud Tower, I couldn't escape from annoying numbers, engineering, elemental magic, and spell model construction. But what did you mean by basic mathematics? You actually had calculus and solid geometry as your basic mathematics? Didn't you know that I chose law in my previous life precisely because I didn't want to study those annoying advanced mathematics subjects? As a liberal arts student, I hate math so much, and I hate it even more that there's advanced mathematics in another world. However, as a delinquent student who was constantly on the brink of passing or failing every subject, I had actually achieved the dreams of many similar students. Teacher Harlois, it's all up to you. I can only count on you. You only think of me at a time like this. That's right. Although I failed my basic mathematics subjects, always had an old grandpa granny, cat pouncing in protest, teacher with me. The wood spirits are planning to expand the Forest of Dreams territory. It's expected to begin on the second Sunday of May, which is 3 days after the letter was sent. Harlois was becoming more and more skilled at translating. It was evident that she had already figured out the pattern of the secret code. However, the more I listened, the colder my heart became. Harlois knew quite a high level of secret information. It was evident that there was at least a spy among the higher-ups of the adventurers. But it was precisely because of this grim reality that I faintly had an idea. Perhaps I could even beat them at their own game. Chapter 331. Justice points? Rewards? Do you need justice points? Since I had such important information, I couldn't afford to be negligent. And so, I left those scammers behind and directly rode Irene Bela back to the campsite. However, Samantha's astonishment upon seeing her was obviously not an act. Perhaps, in her mind, I didn't need justice points at all. It's all because of those scammers. They're constantly trying to find out how many justice points I'll get from this mission and how much they'll get. I feel like if I don't give them a satisfactory price, they'll annoy me to death. Also, I need justice points as well. Indeed, why was it that everyone else could earn justice points, but I couldn't? Actually, I was in dire need of justice points as well, and by quite a bit. After introducing modern management, my account books and justice points were divided into public and private portions. However, no matter if it was for public or private use, there were still many gaps between them. Although Thorngarden was doing quite well in the Cloud Tower, the archmages who stayed at home didn't actually have that many justice points. Most of their goods were processed using supplied materials. However, some items that required justice points to be spent were also purchased on credit. Was it really difficult to understand why credit was used? Or perhaps I should be more direct in saying that credit was used. Archmages who were at least legend rank and above and had a good reputation wouldn't have credit cards on their backs for too long. And as long as I had them participate in this, I would have achieved my most important goal, to stop the Cloud Tower from isolating itself and make these archmages work for me. Of course, I wasn't just casually giving out credit cards. In this day and age, it was far more common to owe money than to be owed money. It was no exaggeration to say that only those who owe money are the bosses. However, if the person providing the credit was a high-interest loan from an evil faction, anyone with a normal brain would still think of ways to exchange the credit card in advance. And in the eyes of most archmages, I was probably the #1 evil faction in the mage world. Even though there were other archmages above me on the calamity rankings, this was discrimination. All right then, I admit that I had indeed used a 90% interest rate on my debt. I also used some inconvenient methods to make an example of those who didn't intend to pay me back. Wasn't this basically forcing them to work hard to earn justice points to pay me back? I was using my own method to express my love for the mages. It was a pity that those fellows didn't understand. Instead, it made my reputation even stranger. Of course, I also had the thought of replenishing my own treasury in the future. After all, no one was a saint without selfish thoughts. Perhaps this business would be quite profitable in the future, but right now, there was only a large pile of promissory notes in the public justice points treasury. We were in a huge deficit. Also, my great industrial party also needed precious research materials and historical secrets and knowledge. We also needed a lot of justice points. As for my personal side, the points that I could peacefully use to increase my strength were basically 0. Why is it 0? That was because there was basically no chance for me to earn anything at all. The calculation system was only established after the God's declaration. Back when I fought against the undead, I didn't have the armlet of contract, so even if I did earn anything, there was no way for me to calculate it. After that, I did all sorts of things in the Cloud Tower. Naturally, I didn't earn any honor points, which were similar to war achievements. Actually, I was also filled with expectations for the exchange list. The essence of ancient sword saints' swordsmanship, first-generation undead, immemorial devils, and even ALS personal undead research records, as well as the ancient gods' understanding of the power of order and holy light. All of this knowledge and legends were truly priceless treasures. Not only that, they were also related to many areas of my research. What? Why didn't I have any ice magic knowledge? Even if I exchanged for any ice magic knowledge, I probably wouldn't be able to understand it. If I really needed it, then Frigid Maw and Harloise, who were holed up in the snowy mountains, would be excellent teachers. At the very least, they would be more than enough for my current needs. As for swordsmanship, research on the undead, and research on the power of order, law, even though I'd already reached a certain level, it was difficult for me to find a suitable teacher. After all, I'd already reached a certain level in this area. What I needed was information and experience that could help me comprehend by analogy. It said that ancient sword saints didn't care about complicated sword techniques. They were used to using simple, basic sword techniques to kill their enemies. Their most obvious characteristics were rough and powerful. It's a pity that this was never passed down. My sword techniques are also self-taught foundational. Perhaps I'll be able to learn a lot from them. Currently, the undead can be divided into 3 main categories: corpses, ghosts, and skeletons. It said that every single undead in ancient times was different. They were capable of changing their physical body structure, and they even had the ability to reproduce in the normal reactions of the living. They also had limitless potential for growth. I really want to dissect them, and see for myself. Just how did the God of holy light reach such a level? Just where did the light of order that can purify and distort come from? If I can obtain first-hand information, not only will my power of law greatly improve, it might even become a powerful bargaining chip against the church. I had always had such a regret. I also had other things I wanted, such as all sorts of divine weapons and magical secrets. Treasures that could activate myth-ranked and semi-god existences would naturally tempt me as well. Unfortunately, my wallet was empty, so I could only look at them. Why didn't I think a way to cheat and obtain them? That would be absolutely impossible. Indeed, justice points were managed by the true gods of Ale faction. I could think of a way to obtain justice points through Womians, but as long as I thought of doing so, I would likely be the one to suffer the greatest losses. If I really did that, it was highly likely that the god of law and contracts, Womians, would directly perish. Just like how the goddess of wealth, Bana, would obtain power from trade and the expansion of the concept of wealth, the exchange of justice points would also greatly benefit Womians, who controlled the concept of contracts. All sorts of equal and fair contracts would allow him to obtain even more believers in faith. However, with power came responsibility, and with every gain came a price. In this system, Womians was also the incarnation of the concept of fairness and equal exchange. But as soon as Womians, who was the overseer of the concept of fairness, began to cheat for his own benefit, the so-called fairness would naturally become nothing more than a joke. And as soon as the concept of fairness collapsed, the entire exchange system would collapse, and Womians, who would bear all the consequences, would definitely perish. Perhaps Womians, as a divine power exchanger, didn't have any selfish desires, but I, who was connected to my soul, did. If my selfish desires were judged by the laws of the world to be his selfish desires, then all of our efforts would be for naught. It was likely that several true gods of Ale faction who had participated in this would perish as well. The end result was that before the justice points exchange system was created, I could still think of a way to obtain justice points from Ale and the others. But now, there was no other way apart from exchanging justice points. I didn't even dare to think of cheating, nor did I dare to step on the sidelines like I did with other things. That was because the only thing that couldn't be lied to was one's own heart. And if there was a problem with one's heart, then it would be catastrophic. And so, although I was the one who created the justice points exchange system, the end result was that not only did I have to obediently think of a way to earn justice points, I also had to think of ways to make up for any loopholes in the system and attack those bastards who try to take advantage of loopholes. This was so that Womians, who wielded the scales and the ruler, would be more and more just. Only then would Womians be able to obtain sufficient benefits from this banquet. Boss Ale, why didn't you give me some benefits before? Haha, you didn't even tell us. Who would have thought of that? We all thought that you wanted to rely on yourself. All right then, it was all my fault. I even considered exchanging for justice points with the system, but creating something out of nothing was ridiculously expensive, and there might not even be any in stock. Exchanging for justice points would be far more reliable. Illusion Sword Saint's Phantom Sword Technique costs 30,000 justice points, and that's only for a copy. You can print as many copies as you want. Why don't you just go rob someone? How could robbing someone be faster than us? Knowledge has a price, that's all. Besides, Womians was the one who evaluated the price. Why don't you go discuss it with him? Indeed, since it was possible to sell copies, martial arts techniques, magical knowledge, and other such items were far less expensive than god equipment. But for the veteran powerful individuals, these secret sword techniques and magic techniques from the immemorial generation might not be any worse than god equipment. But in order to sell them for a good price, they would have to sign a magical contract before purchasing them. Otherwise, they would have to spend money to purchase 1 or 2 copies. Not only that, top-level knowledge even had a limit. For example, this phantom sword technique that could create a physical clone only had 10 copies. I suddenly felt that this method of scamming money was rather familiar. Yep, that was Womian's opinion. From his knowledge and memories, he came to the conclusion that even if it's just a pebble, as long as it's limited in quantity, first come, first served, and so on, it'll make people feel like they'll regret it if they miss this opportunity, and that it'll be gone if they're too late. Naturally, it'll be possible to sell it for an astronomical price. As expected, this was the same method used by those unscrupulous merchants in my previous world. Was this another way of saying that they were shooting themselves in the foot? Then, if they reach the required number, are we really not going to sell them in the future? How is that possible? Apart from using benefits to force them to work for us, the other reason we're taking out these pebbles is to increase the average combat strength of the entire world. If we don't sell them, it'll obviously go against this goal. Wouldn't that be breaking our promise? That'll be a destructive blow to the believers of the true gods. No, we're just not going to buy them directly. When the time comes, we can create a godly secret technique gift pack. We'll draw half of the average number of points and randomly put in top-level sword techniques and magic spells for them to draw. If you draw something that you can't use yourself, then you're welcome to buy them. What's the matter with you? Why are you crouching on the ground? Why are you covering your face? Please don't tell them that this idea came from me. I'll become the target of everyone's pursuit. Apart from the limited time collector's edition, my clone had even given me a prize draw gift pack that would incur the wrath of the heavens. I could already sense that after this news spread, not only would the creator of this idea become the public enemy of all powerful human individuals, it was even possible that Woomians would gain a divine concept of swindling people. Only those who truly tried it would understand the anger and despair of not being able to obtain what they wanted after being drained to the last drop of their blood by the gift pack. They only needed to know that this is the 17th time it's the demon's smile mask again. Is there really an epic-ranked, gold-ranked equipment set that I want? How much sorrow could be contained in those roars of despair? Nobody would be able to understand the jealousy and anger of seeing the face emperor, who had fallen into this trap together with them, casually drawing out the item of their dreams. I think that we should add a patch. If you draw something that you're not satisfied with, you can exchange it for something of equal value. But it's only limited to one exchange. In order to avoid being hunted down in the future, I had racked my brains. Allowing one exchange was already a rare act of kindness. However, since there were too many types of items, even if I allowed one exchange, it would still be highly unlikely that both parties would be able to obtain the item that the other party wanted. That was why I decided that I absolutely had to buy the item that I wanted before this damned gift pack scam plan was activated. Hey, I discovered that there's an undead spy in the campsite. That should count as a contribution, right? According to the principle of equivalent exchange, shouldn't you at least give me 1,000 justice points? I felt that Samantha would be able to give me a satisfactory reward. Indeed, it'll be of some help to us. It has a negative influence on the undead. The reward is 154 to 210 justice points. This is calculated by the armlet of contract. Even with my authority, I can only give out 210 justice points. Who came up with this calculation? It's such a scam. If it's 210 justice points, you'll have to give half of it to those scammers. At most, you'll only be able to keep around 100 justice points. You'll have to wait until the next year to get 30,000 justice points for the first item. Every single armlet is a god's creation. Even if you directly complain to the gods themselves, they won't be able to change anything. Also, do you remember that report? You were the one who suggested that make low-level items cheaper so that there'll be more participants and more young people appearing. Make high-level items as expensive as possible and give as few justice points as possible. That way, you'll be able to force those nerdy shut-ins to work hard to earn justice points, and you'll be able to think of a way to recoup your losses. Harloise replied to my complaint. She seemed to be dissatisfied that I didn't make her an armlet of contract, nor did she agree to exchange for an item for her. Her standards were incredibly high, and all the items she wanted were top-tier items. How could I possibly afford to exchange for them? How, is there such a thing? I don't remember. All right, then. I pretended to be ignorant as I broke out in a cold sweat. Just how many times had I made a fool of myself? As expected, are you thinking to yourself? As expected, I need to think about the future. Otherwise, I'll make a fool of myself if I'm not careful. Relax, I've already seen it. things will be much better in the future. You'll remind me not to make any mistakes in the future. No, it'd be strange if you listen to my advice. You'll never change your suicidal tendencies. You'll get used to making fools of yourself in the future, and you'll naturally forget about it. All right then, just as we were about to engage in the nth human-cat battle, Samantha suddenly interrupted our conversation. Although I can only give you so many justice points right now, if Father carries out the next step of your mission, find and capture the spy, you'll be rewarded with quite a few justice points. Chapter 332. Since justice points became an important resource, the wood spirits learned how to use justice points to make adventurers work for them. They could sell fruits that increased their basic stats for a high price, and they could also issue quests that required justice points to make greedy adventurers work for them. At the very beginning, there would always be some imbalance between income and expenditure. However, I believed in the market's ability to adjust itself. As long as there was a certain amount of trade, eventually every major faction would be able to achieve self-balancing, just like the trade between countries in a certain world. Even if the trade was always imbalanced and ended up going bankrupt, it wouldn't be my fault. At that point, whether or not the Ale faction, which had the sole authority to print money, would be like the hegemon of a certain world, using petrodollars to indirectly control the world, would depend on the individual. Of course, the prerequisite for this was that the Ale faction had the military strength to protect it. After all, we were not without opponents and competitors. To be honest, not long ago, our justice points also had an opponent, the Holy Church's Holy Points. I don't know if the Holy Light servers had calculated that it would be impossible for the Ale faction to spread its influence by itself, or if the Holy Light faction's follower gods had racked their brains to come up with a countermeasure. But the Holy Light faction's Holy War system and Holy Points had already been introduced. However, they had been hastily started, and there were obvious flaws in all aspects. It would be impossible for them to threaten the growth of justice points in the short term. The Holy Light faction didn't have the dwarf god of craftsmanship's heroes' armlets, nor did they have the god of contracts as a witness. They could only record justice points and achievements based on the adventurer's words and evidence. The judges were only Holy Light job class members. Their personal desires, judgments, likes, and dislikes would cause huge fluctuations in both the rewards and the rewards. The Holy Light faction was nothing more than a different type of mercenary. The most obvious difference was that the Holy Light faction's current Holy Points treasury was mostly filled with holy swords, cultivation experiences of Holy Light job class members, super pure holy water, and so on. Even the Holy Bearers, who had the right to exchange for justice points, were mostly members of the Holy Church or trusted believers. It seemed like there was indeed nothing wrong with doing this. However, it was still the same as before. If we preset the participants and rewards, all we did was create an army that was closer to the Church. We didn't truly understand the use of our justice points to mobilize the power of the masses and have as many people participate as possible in order to create the overall situation. Of course, it was also possible that the true gods had already thought of this. However, when it came to the level of the Church's implementation, they did not want to let the goodies flow into the hands of outsiders. It was also possible that the Pope and the Church's headquarters thought this way. However, when it came to the basic level and the specific implementation, it was still, how can we give these treasures to outsiders? Those evil, blasphemous items must be sealed in the forbidden warehouse forever. How can a contract that can be terminated at any time guarantee loyalty? At the very least, you have to have a lifetime contract. And so, it became a new type of Holy Knight squad and mercenary squads. However, while it raised the bar for all sorts of things, it also lost the most important aspect of being popular. Stupid. With how they're doing things, they've fundamentally lost all fairness and balance. No matter how much they invest, it'll still be a small circle in the end. Also, due to the Holy Church's tremendous numbers, it was likely that they wouldn't be able to discover the disadvantages of doing things like this in a short period of time. Before we had enough contract heroes, just the Holy Church's branches across the entire continent would allow them to have just as many God's favorites as we did. However, Once we truly became powerful, there would be a huge difference. After all, no matter what the Holy Church did, they would only be excavating their own potential from their own strength. Meanwhile, we would be borrowing the strength of the entire world. The former might be limited, while the latter was limitless. What we needed to do was to properly manage this platform, and then have the platform automatically earn benefits for us. We shouldn't use the platform as a tool for our own selfish desires. Only when this platform had a sufficient market share would it be time for us to speak up. That was why we were willing to invest so much in this platform. Meanwhile, the Holy Church was calculating over every ounce, deeply afraid that they would waste their resources or give them to their enemies. History had already proven that being calculative over every ounce was foolish. When Armageddon truly arrived, even the gods used their treasures to arm their believers, but it was already too late. The most important thing in this world is talent. It's not that many people don't have potential. It's just that they don't have the opportunity to take the first step. As long as the number of people increases, not only will there be talents, there will even be geniuses and freaks. This definitely won't be something that can be accomplished in a single day. We have sufficient patience to wait. In this aspect, we had far more foresight than the Holy Church. As long as the number of people participating increased, there would naturally be geniuses and heroes who would rise to the top. What followed would be a long and arduous night. This was also destined to be an era where heroes would appear. What we needed to do was to make the Justice Points platform a place where heroes would appear and obtain their trust. Once they believed that this platform represented justice, at that time, the Ale faction that controlled this platform would naturally have the loudest voice and become incomparably powerful. In a few days, I would also announce that God's favorites could also participate in the Contract Heroes program. Although this would be providing resources to fatten up the Holy Church's warriors, it would also be a form of poaching. I wanted to see whether or not the Holy Church would be so generous. If the Holy Church refused to treat us equally, there would likely be people who would resent us. Of course, nobody was an idiot. Perhaps there were already people in the Holy Church who noticed the problem. However, judging from the policies they adopted, it was obvious that this wasn't the mainstream view. By the time most people or the higher-ups of the Holy Church discovered the problem and made amendments, the situation would likely already be set. Cough, cough. I seem to have gone off topic again. Let's get back to the main topic. It wasn't like there weren't any disadvantages to doing this. It would indeed be difficult to guarantee loyalty if the barrier to entry was too low. This was especially true in the early stages of the game, where spies would be far too common. If we set up a 24-hour surveillance system, that would probably be able to guarantee loyalty. In the end, we would be no different from the Holy Church. However, as long as we discovered any spies or traitors, as long as the Justice Point system operated fairly and properly, not only would the spies or traitors forever lose their status as contract heroes, there would also be a surprise waiting for them. Would it be easy to discover spies or traitors in a normal situation? Of course it wouldn't be. If we casually pointed out spies or traitors without sufficient evidence, not only would it be easy to alert the enemy, but as long as the enemy refused to admit to their crimes, not only would it be quite easy for disputes to arise, it would also affect the fragile trust that the adventurers and the wood spirits had worked so hard to establish. But who was I? I was a professional law creator, a judge, the famous detective Roland. Roland's fingerprint extraction technique. With a wave of my hand, a silver light extracted the fingerprints from the letter and envelope and imprinted them on another piece of white paper. The fingerprints on the letter should belong to the writer, and it was highly likely that it belonged to the high-level spy himself. Apart from our fingerprints on the envelope, there were also fingerprints from the letter's sender and writer. Judging from the two completely different fingerprints, at the very least, the sender of the letter had a companion, and it wasn't the same person. Next, we'll check the most recent medical records and see if any thieves have been injured recently. If there aren't any, we'll start with the snake-shaped dagger and dark job class members and investigate them repeatedly. Don't worship me too much. I'm a professional. I proudly waved my hand when I saw Samantha's expression, which showed that she wanted to say something but didn't. I was confident that when it came to investigating cases, investigating methods, I was at least 300 years ahead of the current generation. In the end, Samantha shook her head and didn't say anything. However, Jill couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Idiot father. What Big Sis means is that there's information at the entrance. Yesterday, there was only one black-cloaked thief who went out by himself, and he just happened to fit all the criteria. Did you forget? We can use the magical vines to monitor the situation 24 hours a day. All right then. So the 7 virtues already knew who the thief was. So it was a rare moment of filial piety, and they found an excuse to give me points. That's not the case. With these fingerprints, we'll have enough evidence to make it difficult for the thief to refute. As a neutral party, I hope that you'll appear and directly testify against the thief. Of course, I wanted to say that line for a long time. There's only one truth. You're the murderer. I was already making a gesture of pointing out the murderer, but unfortunately, the wood spirits only calmly looked at me. The most tragic thing in life was that even though you used a joke, no one understood what you meant, and they all commented on me. Where did the murderer come from? Nobody's dead yet, right? Are you the rumored dead elementary school student? Just what year is this joke from? You've probably used it too much. System notification. Commenting on someone's crime at your doorstep will cost 5 justice points. Puffed. You're actually providing such a service? Wait a moment. It's justice points, not fate points? What do you need justice points for? I also have beauty products that I want to exchange for. Do you think that your system can exchange for beauty products from other systems? Let me tell you, this is called racial discrimination. No, this is racial discrimination. You actually dare to discriminate against a system? Do you want to challenge the ultimate death quest? Why would a system like you need beauty products? You're forcing me to comment on you. Let me say this first. I'll charge for commenting as well. Poison Dagger Fane, a silver-rank thief and the captain of the 4th small party in the Wind of Cass adventure group. He possesses an elite poison dagger, Snake's Curse. He's skilled in stealth and assassination. He doesn't have any famous deeds or evil deeds, but said that he really likes to gamble. His gambling luck isn't good, and he owes a lot of money. When I saw the name list of the messenger, I wasn't in a hurry to arrest the messenger. In this case of being a traitor, the most important person wasn't the messenger, but the person who wrote the letter. There didn't seem to be any difference. Actually, there was a huge difference. Based on my past experience with cases, it would be quite difficult to catch the truly sly criminals directly. They were quite skilled at hiding behind the scenes and ordering others to do their bidding. It would be quite easy for problems to occur, and the executioner might not even know why he or she was doing the mission. The executioner would only indirectly receive orders from the mastermind, such as a letter, a message from a middleman, a strange pattern on a wall, or a strange menu from a certain restaurant. In fact, it was even possible that the messenger was only bait sent out by the true mastermind. As long as the messenger became passive, the true mastermind would immediately cut off all communication, eliminate the middleman, and erase the information that was highly likely to be exposed before vanishing without a trace. Fane's gambling personality was also the best weakness. As long as the mastermind was willing to pay a large amount of gold coins or was Fane's creditor, it wouldn't be difficult to make Fane work for the mastermind. That was why it would be quite unreasonable to directly make a move on Fane in such a situation. It would be more appropriate to keep an eye on Fane's surroundings and investigate his social connections step by step. Then, after making thorough preparations, it would be possible to rein in the net. Someone reported Fane and him as spies. We know who the traitor is. Judging from how Rosa, who had excitedly reported the news, hurriedly took a step back in fear at my expression, my current expression was quite twisted. How could it be like this? I got reported so easily. What's the point of having a famous detective? Can't we just play by the rules? What happened to the mastermind and the sly criminal? I got reported just like that? Isn't this too second-rate? Can't we just have fun together? Haha, famous detective? More like a mysterious detective. All right then, the news soon arrived. The person who reported this was someone I was familiar with. He was the leader of the large mercenary group Westwood Guardians, the Black Guardian Kaiser Loven, a subordinate of his. I'm Mullane, a bronze-ranked bandit. Our boss sent out a bandit squad to patrol the surrounding area. In the end, that kid went out alone, suspiciously, so I followed him. In the end, I found out that he was meeting with the undead in private. Then, we beat him up, and that kid was done. It turns out that he owed someone money, and a black-clothed person threatened him with this, forcing him to deliver a letter for him. The black-clothed person was also arrested. He's a bronze-rank undead mage named Dion. Impossible. I swear on my grandfather's name that he's definitely not the real culprit. Someone must have pushed him out to be the scapegoat. The main culprit on the surface definitely isn't the real culprit. That's how all detective novels are written. Haha, you should just admit defeat, mysterious Detective Roland. Chapter 333. Only 50 justice points? Sigh, what a pity. Since a certain mercenary group had volunteered to help me, the only justice points I earned from finding the traitor was the 50 justice points I had earned from providing the fingerprints. However, those two undead fellows admitted to their crimes without any hesitation. One claimed that he was addicted to gambling and had become muddle-headed, while the other claimed that he had mysteriously been bewitched by a lich. I didn't even need to use any evidence before they took all the blame. I also unhesitatingly used a forbidden spell to extract their memories. Their brains were completely blank for a few weeks, but I didn't gain anything else worth mentioning. The rookie undead mage Dean indeed believed that he had been controlled by an undead forbidden spell and had become the servant of a lich that might have existed. Both his testimony and fingerprints proved that he was the one who wrote the letter. However, I felt that the situation wasn't quite right. After all, he couldn't explain how he had obtained such high-level information. All he could say was that it was a rumor. Rumor? Indeed, there are plenty of such rumors. There's even a rumor that the nature god is about to descend. Can anyone believe that? Now that I had investigated further, there were no more clues. After all, there weren't any serious consequences. In the end, I could only punish them by depriving them of their status as contract heroes. All I could do was be more vigilant. However, there were some things that made me suspicious and apprehensive. After all, there were times when the memories of the living weren't necessarily real, especially when the opponent was an undead. After all, some undead magic was capable of altering memories and knowledge. Increase the defense level of the campsite. Have the magical plants monitor all the important locations. Also, have the following important individuals keep an eye on them. That was why, even though I didn't say anything on the surface, I had secretly made many preparations. 2 days wasn't a long time, nor was it short. However, on the battlefield, where every second mattered, it was incredibly precious. Perhaps the traitors really were those two brats, or perhaps the true mastermind behind the scenes had restrained himself. There had been no signs of any information being leaked over the past 2 days, nor had I met any new informants. I had already swapped out all the undead patrols in the area with my subordinates. Unless they had a more secure method, the letters would still end up in my hands. And if they had a more convenient method of contacting me, they wouldn't have needed to send me letters earlier. Another piece of evidence that everything was becoming peaceful was the fact that the undead lords hadn't sent out any large-scale armies in the past 2 days. This seemed to mean that the undead hadn't discovered anything. This was doubtlessly the best news of all. At midnight the next day, a magical pattern suddenly flashed in the night sky. It was an emergency signal to summon all adventurers. At this point, concealment was meaningless. Since they were about to be discovered anyway, it would be better to gather all their combat strength and prepare for a direct battle. However, the adventurers who went out to hunt were worried that they had gone to the wrong place when they returned to the camp. After all, the changes here were too great. In fairy tales, elves were capable of building a small house in a single night. In reality, the elves were capable of borrowing the power of the forest to build solid defenses. Meanwhile, the wood spirits were far more skilled than the elves. Under the protection of their mother goddess, they were capable of distorting reality. The century-old tree in the center of the camp had already shed its disguise. Its withered bark was blown away by the wind, revealing a gigantic root extending from the ground. This was an extension of the strongest tree in the Forest of Dreams, the Sky Tree. This ugly and gigantic root had already spread throughout the entire camp. Countless green lights were spilling out from its roots. The wood spirits became even more spirited as they bathed in this light, providing the plants with endless nutrients. In the next 2 days, the wood spirits used a small shovel made from the sky tree to dig a small hole that was 1/10 of a meter wide and buried 2 stones in it. This was a ritual to worship the earth. Next, they would sprinkle seed from the Forest of Dreams and pray for 10 seconds to sincerely thank their mother for her gift. Then, they would pour rainwater from a silver container to remember nature's grace and majesty. Once all 3 were done, the ritual would be complete. The abundant essence of nature would cause the tiny seeds to transform into a gigantic tree ant or a dangerous magical plant within 3 minutes. You make it sound so complicated. Isn't it just digging a hole, burying the seeds, watering them, and waiting for 3 minutes? Why 3 minutes? I suddenly thought of instant noodles. Are these all instant seeds? When I asked her about this, Samantha pretended not to hear me, but a mysterious red blush appeared on her face. Rosa, on the other hand, was quite happy to tell me. Yep, you're right. Actually, there's no need for any ritual at all. All we need to do is bury the seeds and sprinkle them with water. The mother goddess herself doesn't like complicated rituals, and she's never stingy with us. However, Sister Samantha says that this is no good and that others will look down on us. That's why we need to make every step a bit more complicated and add meaning to it. All right, then, it was likely that many new religions were torturing themselves like this. In the end, they would constantly increase the ritual's procedures and requirements in order to make it seem more dignified. In the end, this would be passed down from generation to generation, causing even themselves to be annoyed. Little Samantha, as the ritual is passed down from generation to generation, or from the higher-ups to the lower-ups, the ritual will definitely change to the point where even you won't recognize it. At that time, if you cut off a portion of the ritual, your believers won't recognize it, and it might even cause a religious war. You're just looking for trouble. You're looking for your own death. Samantha nodded with a pained expression. She had also noticed this. However, the problem was that the religious ritual had already been passed down, and it wouldn't be so easy to change it. Cough. Let's not even talk about the future. Even Amelia was having a hard time dealing with her own religious ritual. At any rate, the new Forest of Dreams was currently in the midst of a full evolution. Although the Forest of Dreams lost a lot of its power through the sky-reaching tree's roots, and since it was so far away, the Forest of Dreams would only be able to transmit 1 or 2 layers of its power. However, the Forest of Dreams itself had nearly limitless power, and the Forest of Dreams headquarters hadn't suffered any losses, so they could afford to squander it. Originally, the most dangerous part would have been the roots that could be cut off, but now that the most dangerous part had passed, the roots had grown strong enough that it would be difficult to cut them off. And so, with the help of the endless natural essence, all sorts of ancient war trees and magical plants furiously grew. The temporary wooden fences suddenly grew more than 10 times their original size, becoming a sturdy city wall that was more than 10 meters tall. The newly grown roots were absorbing nutrients from the earth. Compared to an indestructible city wall, a city wall that was capable of self-repairing would be even more despairing. Each and every one of the ancient war trees was tall and sturdy. However, their eyes were filled with confusion. Without the mother goddess's care and the overly short growth period, the ancient war trees were nothing more than premature babies with short lifespans. However, they lost their intelligence and growth potential in exchange for peak combat strength and combat instincts born for battle. Under the wood spirit's command, the ancient war trees were fearless and unstoppable. If the ancient war trees were the most outstanding guards, then the magical plants would be the most intricately designed war machines. Numerous gigantic pea shooters peeked out from various key locations on the city wall. They were all 3 to 4 meters tall, and their cannons were half a meter in diameter. If one got close to them, they would even hear faint sounds of prayers. Praise the holy light. Under the illumination of the holy light, all evil shall be purified. In the name of the holy light, bestow the evil with the flames of purification from the heavens. Yep, these holy light pea shooters were currently praying to the holy light. Their roots and storehouses were already overflowing with holy light. Since my experiments had already proved that even demons could summon holy light, it was only natural that plants could do the same. Of course, there was a slight side effect, which was that the other holy knight and holy light priests would have expressions of complete disbelief when they saw this scene. Unfortunately, it was likely that news of what happened in the Northlands had already spread, so nobody argued for the sake of faith. Otherwise, I would have been able to use my new research results to give them a verbal slap in the face. Perhaps I would even be able to create a few more examples of faith collapsing, which would further damage the Holy Church's reputation. The Holy Light Pea Shooters were only one member of the magical plant army. For example, the fourth generation of Pea Shooters had already evolved to the point of being able to store holy light and overload. The magical plants had already greatly evolved, and we were beginning to prepare many surprises for the undead. After all preparations were complete, Samantha, who was lost in the core of the heaven-reaching tree's roots, gently caressed the seed of the forest of dreams as she recited the final words of praise. "Awaken, my sister." That's right, my sister. During the past 2 days of adjustment, the modest Jill of the 3 virtues had fused together with the seed. When the seed awakened, Jill's consciousness would also fuse together with the forest, transforming into the omnipresent will of the entire forest. When Jill's beautiful wooden face opened her eyes, a faint green divine light ignited the entire world. The entire world began to change. The sky-covering roots transformed into a towering tree, and a new green divine light rose from the ground. All natural life here felt a mysterious warmth and nourishment. The air was now filled with a faint green light. Large amounts of nature's essence had caused the seed to sprout. The entire world's order began to distort as a new forest of dreams began to grow. Jill, who already had the ability to transform into a forest to begin with, now transformed into the overall commander of this fortress, as well as the new owner of this land. All adventurers and contract warriors, our goal is to expand the territory of the Forest of Dreams. Soon, the undead will come to stop us. As long as we can hold on for a certain amount of time and allow the new Forest of Dreams to mature, we shall obtain the final victory. All participants shall receive large amounts of gifts and the friendship of the wood spirits. It was about time for Samantha to state the goal of this quest. At this point, the undead lord's armies would soon arrive, and it would be too late to leave even if they wanted to. Although this was rather shameless and a scam, it was indeed a good method to gather the greatest amount of strength. Every adventurer who kills a high-level undead shall receive an additional 100 fate points as a gift, as well as a free limb recovery service. The friendship of the wood spirits can also be exchanged for a chance to exchange for an item that isn't for sale. Since adventurers were fighting for the sake of personal benefits, we might as well give them actual benefits as bait. Meanwhile, not only could the undead in Asalivis see the endless divine light that pierced through the clouds, it was likely that even the cloud tower on the other side of the sea could see it. On the city walls of Asalivis, Davy, who had been happily chatting with his host and guests, suddenly stood up. The green divine light in the sky was glowing like starlight, and the undead emperor's angry shouts echoed in his ears in unison. "Davy, if you allow this green thing to grow any further, you'll regret it for eternity. Your soul will shatter into pieces. I'll have you howl in pain until the end of the world." The undead emperors didn't have good tempers. The furious undead emperors immediately gave their representatives the absolute order that if they failed, they would be killed. Meanwhile, the 2 esteemed guests by Davy's side also revealed rare expressions of astonishment. The will of nature? Could it be the new god of nature? No, it's even more powerful than the god of nature. This is a threat on the level of the creator goddesses. It reminds me of that insane woman and her older sister. This is a threat to our entire species. We need to eliminate it as soon as possible. Up until now, the undead emperors had always looked down on the wood spirits. After all, there were far too many coincidences involved in the wood spirits' existence. Even their creator, Amelia, wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat any undead emperor under normal circumstances. This arrogance came from their foundational knowledge. It was similar to how old-time nobles would look down on a lucky millionaire who happened to win the lottery. It came from the fact that the undying were used to seeing meteors disappear in the blink of an eye. In their eyes, the wood spirits weren't a threat at all. The only true enemies were dragons and mages. The undying would always treat other undying existences as equals. In the undead emperor's minds, the wood spirits who were like caged beasts wouldn't be much trouble at all. After all, even if they were undefeatable in the Forest of Dreams, not to mention the fact that the forest couldn't move, once the undead emperors truly arrived, their so-called undefeatability would become nothing more than a joke. And so, the undead emperors even secretly compromised and made concessions to the wood spirits. In the undead emperor's plans, the most important thing right now was to conquer Bardi. If they could unseal the Bardi Empire, it would be even better if they could obtain the assistance of their gigantic allies in the future. As for the area around the Victoria Harbor that the wood spirits had occupied, they could leave it to them. Even if someone tried to ambush the undead through this area, they could just let them ambush them. Anyways, a small army wouldn't be worth it to surround and annihilate the entire undead calamity. If any country's army really did invade through this area, they would have to face an astronomical number of undead calamities as soon as they exited the forest. It was impossible for the forest to move to the undead's core territory, so the undead would have plenty of time to prepare their strategies. Yes, all of the undead strategies were based on the most basic of common sense. The forest wouldn't move. But now it was moving. Perhaps the newly conquered forest wouldn't cover a large area. But as long as the seeds were planted and large areas were spread out, the undead's territory would be slowly nibbled away. If both the eastern and western front lines were at the level of a direct battlefield, it would be taboo for a military strategist to face enemies on both sides. Their entire strategy would likely collapse. How can this be? Get rid of those damned weeds and little things. The entire undead country started moving. Countless high-level undead began summoning their own armies. This was a battle that would determine who would be the ruler of this land. This was a battle of an unimaginable scale. As for me, I had been waiting for such a long time. Frostmourne, Ice Calamity, is hungry. It's thirsting for more souls. I raised my pitch-black, crystallized magic sword as an endless undead army gathered behind me. The undead would never imagine that someone of their own kind was thirsting for more souls right here. I'm not hungry. I only drank 2 bottles of milk this morning, meow. The silly cat pretended to be naturally cute. Do you really like to make fun of me that much? Can't you just keep acting cool? Chapter 334. After the undead emperors gave the urgent order to gather together, the undead armies ended their vacation. If one looked at the real world as a map, they would see countless black dots gathering at a certain location. The undead armies were currently gathering in a canyon more than 100 kilometers away from the wood spirits' camp. The undead's roars reverberated through the air as the undead lords communicated with each other through soul fluctuations. While the undead lords were afraid of the undead emperor's rage, they were also secretly delighted to see Davy fall out of favor. Leading the undead armies back to the world that originally belonged to them and re-establishing their own country was a dream that every ancient undead couldn't refuse. Even Aso was unable to resist such a temptation. And while the undead emperors were restricted by the dimensional laws of the mortal plane, the highest glory fell upon the despicable demonic ghosts. That's right, Davy was Aso's favorite student, but he was still a demonic ghost. He was an ugly, stinky, low-level undead ghoul that crawled on the ground with a hunchback. The undead lords had their own pride. Most undead lords were born as high-level undead, such as skeleton mages, liches, and banshees. They had always viewed zombies as brainless, lowly slaves, and would never tolerate a low-level demonic ghost climbing over their heads. Most undead worlds weren't so peaceful. Souls were the foundation of an undead, and devouring souls represented the highest law of survival of the fittest. The undead's method of resolving disputes was simple, crude, and effective, directly destroying their opponents. Submit? Die. This was the typical choice of the weak in the undead world. If it wasn't for the fact that the undead emperors had forcefully forbidden the undead from fighting amongst themselves in the mortal plane, no matter how powerful Davy was, he would have been challenged to the point of death by other undead lords of the same power level, no matter how strong he was. And right now, the undead lords were excitedly discussing how to drag Davy down and make him lose his composure in battle. Then, they would save the day and use their military achievements to drag Davy down from his high horse. Of course, for Davy, this was pressure and threat, but also motivation and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If Davy was able to prove his abilities in this battle, with the undead emperor's support, he would be able to stabilize his position as the supreme commander of the mortal plane and become the #1 individual below the undead emperors. This was the trouble a general had to face, especially when he had to face all kinds of miscellaneous soldiers from all over the world. This was a bad habit of the military, or perhaps it could be called an unspoken rule. Even the undead emperors outside the dimensional barrier could only tacitly agree to this collective behavior of the undead lords. Of course, this would only be limited to this one time. As long as Davy could prove his own abilities, the other undead lords would have to maintain the most basic level of respect and obedience. Only then would Davy truly be able to take his position. However, the most difficult part would be the first time. At the very least, right now, Davy was furious at the undead lord's obvious procrastination. Lord Jinmu said that he has diarrhea today. It seems like he is suffering from food poisoning. Let's not talk about how a lich could eat. He was already a skeleton with no guts or intestines. So how could he be poisoned? Great Sovereign Een said that his wife is about to give birth, and he hopes to receive forgiveness. All right then, this headless knight actually had the ability to reproduce, had a wife, and was even able to give birth. If it wasn't for the fact that this knight's body structure was special, or that he was simply spouting nonsense, it was likely that some kind of love story would begin. Duke Kami said that the sun is too strong today, and that he'll get sunburn as a Blood Tribe member. A Duke-level Blood Tribe member was actually afraid of the sun? This was probably the newest discovery of the year. However, the person who came to report this despite the sun was actually a newbie Blood Tribe member. Duke Kami, were you waiting for Davy to comment on this? Lord Grey Undead said that an adventurer team has found his lair, and that he's taking his treasure trove and moving it overnight. The undead lord's excuses were completely insincere, nor did they try to hide anything. It was obvious that they were trying to make things difficult for their new boss. However, Davy, who hadn't stabilized his position yet, could only endure it. Right now, all the undead lords were obviously asking him to prove his abilities. If he tried to use the name of an undead emperor to pressure them, it would instead make him seem useless. Since the undead emperors didn't have absolute authority, the undead lords were all on equal footing, making it difficult for anyone to go up against them. Back when Yongya died in battle, the Yongya army immediately started a civil war. This wasn't without reason. It wasn't that there weren't any undead lords who believed in Davy and volunteered to help him at such a critical moment. However, Davy still had the disadvantage of having insufficient military strength. And so, Davy could only forcefully hold on with his direct subordinates. When he thought about the 2 top-level undead lords who volunteered to help him, he became filled with confidence again. Meanwhile, a certain someone, yep, I was referring to myself. However, it was impossible for me to think so far ahead. It was just that it was rather strange that there weren't as many undead as I had expected. Hey, are we really at like this? Meanwhile, in the temporary undead camp, I was wearing a black cape and surrounded by black mist. I was doing my best to look like an evil villain boss. That's right, I had managed to sneak in with no difficulty at all. I had managed to sneak in just like that. Originally, I had expected to meet with a fully organized undead army. At that time, the little bit of manpower I had would only be able to be used as cannon fodder or a small ambush squad. However, when I ambushed a corpse wizard lord, I unexpectedly discovered that the undead army was disorganized. In order to deal with this calamity, the current leader of the undead army was willing to take in any undead. And so, I brought a few skeleton soldiers with me to sneak in. I then discovered that there was no one here to check on me at all, so I unhesitatingly had all of my undead army join the undead wizard lord under my control. Damn it, there are so many undead mages. How many points is this? I can exchange for as many shiny things as I want. As for my teammates, fine, I met those troublesome undead mages. They were all in high spirits as they looked around at the undead camp. My perfect undead gift pack had the power of death attached to it. Even if undead mages sensed me, I would definitely be more like an undead than a true undead. I definitely wouldn't have to worry about being discovered, provided that the undead mages weren't too ridiculous. Would you like a cup? Can I? It's red? Is this a tomato drink? Huh, you're so humorous. Hey, hey, hey. Didn't pretending to be a blood tribe member make you drink blood? Can you even drink blood? TSK, as expected, you spat it out. What a waste. What? You want fake teeth? Actually, I have some freshly plucked golden teeth here, but they're a little expensive. Could it be that priests of the goddess of wealth could even earn money from the dead? Damn it, there was actually the light of God's blessing. My act of selling fake teeth to zombies had been approved by the goddess of wealth. Could this be the new path of wealth? Hey, could priests and goddess of wealth have some morals? Cheers. Ajin, why did you lose so much weight again? My dear dwarf lady, it's already ridiculous enough for undead to get drunk and go crazy. You're not seeing Ajin, but a skeleton elf that only has bones left. How could I not lose weight? Stop pouring wine for skeletons. It's already leaking out from their jaws. What a pity. Damn it. Why was I so foolish as to pretend to be a lich? I can't even drink wine now. Still, it was no wonder that they were so happy. After all, we had just killed an undead lord. If we sold the spoils of war, even if we didn't count them as justice points, we would still be able to earn quite a bit. How did we kill him? The Lich had simply brought him into that unlucky skeleton general's camp. He had first set up a soundproof barrier, then ambushed the skeleton general and killed him with a single slash. It was that simple, just like how Betty and the others had never expected that there would be undead spies among the living. The great majority of the undead would never have expected that there would be living ambushes among the undead. As long as an ordinary undead lord got close to me, I was confident that I would be able to defeat it within 10 seconds. Then, I would forcefully sign a contract with the undead and turn their troops into my backup force. We've already ambushed 3 undead lords. If this continues, it'll be easy for something to go wrong. It's fine. They're just noobs who barely reach high level. It'd be a stretch to call them lords, so it won't affect them at all. It's still too early for that. I'm still planning on digging up more cannon fodder before the battle begins. Right. Has Ajin returned yet? Is there any news? No. From the very start, I felt that it was unreliable for him to go scout. You know how skilled he is as a thief. Wait a moment. Weren't you the one who told him to go scout? That's what he said. All right then. It was now time for Betty and me to stare at each other in shock. It would seem that this seemingly honest barbarian, Jin, wasn't lacking in slyness. Not only that, this seemingly honest barbarian, Jin, didn't have any ill intentions when it came to swindling people. Even someone as experienced and sly as I would fail miserably if I wasn't careful. Asterisk bang. Asterisk the sound of something crashing outside caused us to relax slightly. Ever since I watched Robin Hood, Peter Pan's Roland version, this barbarian would always hop when he walked. Along the way, he toppled more than 10 tents, more than 30 trees, dug more than 100 holes, and got stuck in a mud pit twice to ask for help. But the most ridiculous part was that he actually jumped out of a hot spring. Cough. Judging from this sound, this barbarian thief who had successfully swindled us had returned alive. It seemed that he had completed his mission well and was in a good mood. Brother Roland, I met 2 strong men who were even stronger than me. I just arm wrestled with them and lost. You're stronger than me. Come, let's go take revenge. Arm wrestle? Strong men? Wait a moment. There's someone alive here. Chapter 335. Or the undead. If someone asked this question, everyone would have their own answer. Undying villains, destroyers of order, existences that should be purified by holy light. This was the standard holy light answer, as well as the mainstream view of this world. Miraculous creations created under certain conditions are existences that are the complete opposite of living beings with life energy. There are two main conditions for their creation: sufficient negative energy and soul shards. This was the standard answer of a mage, with comparisons and hypotheses. Professional undead mages would probably add a bunch of comments, such as the types of undead, the necessary requirements, and so on. I like the term miraculous creations, but forget about negative energy. The first undead didn't have any negative energy at all. They were usually noble and unyielding war spirits. As the first undead, Ale once mentioned that the first undead were naturally born. They were brave warriors unwilling to die. Only those with undying wills that were strong enough to resist the cycle of reincarnation would be able to walk out of their graves by themselves and transform into the undying Valkyrie. Yep, there were also the legendary natural undead. Everything originated from the soul. Those who were able to use their pure souls to resist death's sweet, eternal slumber were all extraordinary historical figures. There might not even be one in every generation. The later undead were created by demons to study how Valkyrie was created. In order to allow the undead that didn't reach Valkyrie's standards to move, they used negative energy from the lower planes to fill in their bodies. This special type of negative energy came to be known as the power of death. This was a power that originated from the chaos abyss. However, it possessed bloodthirsty, insane, and chaotic natures. Even a wise archmage would become insane and incomprehensible after transforming into a lich due to the loneliness of living in solitude and the corrosion of negative energy. Low-level undead that only relied on negative energy to move about were even more bloodthirsty killing machines. And now that I mentioned the classic undead created by negative energy, it was time to talk about positive energy and negative energy. Positive energy and negative energy were two types of energy that counteracted each other. There were many types of positive energy, with the most common being holy light and the power of nature. Many angels and god envoys in the upper planes could almost instinctively use these types of energy. But the reason why they were called positive energy, apart from the fact that they were commonly connected to the source of order, was that these types of energy were often beneficial to the living and could even heal injuries. On the other hand, negative energy was the opposite. Due to the rise of undead and undead magic, negative energy was now equivalent to the undead's power of death. However, this type of energy was harmful to the living just by coming into contact with it. It was the most important nourishment for the undead. The so-called death planes were where negative energy and the power of death gathered. For an ordinary mage, this level of research would be more than enough. After all sorts of offensive spells such as exhaustion rays, curses, mental retardation, negative energy contact, and so on only required one to follow the classic spell model and create a specific type of negative energy, then toss it out in a specific way to injure others. Since negative energy was the undead's most foundational energy source and filler, it wouldn't be enough for an ordinary mage to study it. It could be said that most undead mages had done quite a bit of research in a negative energy. Instead of summoning the undead, there were curse masters who specialized in negative energy type offensive spells. This was the most famous branch of undead mages. But interestingly, the same type of negative energy spell would be highly damaging to the living, but it would be a light of healing for the undead. Could it be that life and death were such opposites? Perhaps in the eyes of other mages, this was nothing more than a natural phenomenon like rain after dark clouds, but I was quite interested in researching why dark clouds form and how raindrops form. The body would still be the same body, and the soul would still be the same soul. Could it be that the difference between life and death was only limited to the power of death or the power of life? Could it be that life and death represented two completely different forms of existence? Why was it that some Valkyrie were even more powerful than when they were alive, while the undead were generally weaker in power, and their potential for development was greatly limited? Just what happened during the transition between life and death? When I was at my craziest, I once conducted insane experiments. Every step of the transition between the living and the undead was recorded in a chart. After hundreds of precise experiments, I came to a very strange conclusion. In my previous world, a person's body mass would decrease by 21 grams after death. In this world, this mysterious 21 grams still represented the mass of the soul. But unlike my previous world, souls existed in this world, and there were also undead magic spells that allowed the soul to return to the physical body. My conclusion was that after transforming into an undead, the weight would return to the body, but it would definitely be less than 21 grams. The amount of soul that returns ranges from 1 gram to 20 grams. In that case, the irreversible process of death is that the soul will shatter first. At the very least, a portion of the soul will vanish without a trace. Afterwards, I used my enemies to conduct a series of experiments on the transition between life and death. This included making the living and the dead coexist at the same time, causing the living to directly transform into the dead, while screaming in extreme pain. The change in the soul's weight was still measurable. All the souls of the dead would lose a portion of their mass. This was unavoidable. Even if I knew that the soul's mass was lacking, what was the point? Haha. For mages, knowledge itself was power. It all depended on how you converted it. Not only did I obtain first-hand information on soul conversion, I also unexpectedly discovered a conclusion. The lower the level of an undead, the lower the soul mass they would have. Typically, 3 to 5 grams would be enough. Any more soul fragments would naturally dissipate, and the only thing that would make up for the lack of soul fragments would be the so-called negative energy. In that case, can I hypothesize that the more complete an undead soul is, the stronger they will be? Or perhaps the opposite is also true. The undead's level determines how much of their soul and intelligence they can retain. This research result doubtlessly matched the fact that low-level undead were foolish, while high-level undead were capable of retaining their intelligence and memories from before they died. However, just this result alone was still insufficient to satisfy my research expectations, which was why I viciously experimented. All right then, I was indeed rather insane at the time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have kidnapped 2 Valkyrie, the god of holy light, and conducted all sorts of experiments on them. I dissected them, extracted their souls, and then placed them back inside. I also tested the Valkyrie's body's capacity to hold low-level undead souls, and so on. Before the 2 Valkyries' souls became nothing more than fragments that couldn't be pieced back together, I obtained sufficient experimental data. The results were quite astonishing. The Valkyries' souls were astonishingly complete. Their souls weren't 21 grams, but rather 23 grams and 25 grams. And after dissecting 2 living saint-ranked undead, I confirmed that all living saint-ranked undead souls weighed 21 grams, which wouldn't change due to the difference in power level. In that case, the only possibility was that their souls had increased in weight when they transformed into Valkyrie. Since a decrease in the soul's mass would mean a decrease in power level, wouldn't an increase in the soul's mass represent some sort of evolution and sublimation? As for Valkyrie souls, they indeed had obvious advantages over common souls in all aspects. Just their souls alone had natural magical resistance, and they were also capable of increasing their physical body's power level. They were even capable of switching between different physical bodies without dying due to their souls shattering. Fine then, it seemed that I'd gone overboard back in the day. Even the sturdy Valkyrie souls were reduced to mere fragments. In that case, my conclusion and experimental goal were revealed. If I was also capable of increasing the soul's mass, would I be able to create undead that were even stronger than Valkyries? And so, my premise and experimental method were confirmed. Valkyrie was usually the sublimation of ordinary souls. In that case, What exactly happened during the sublimation? What was it that caused Valkyrie to become Valkyrie? Only the venerated would be able to accomplish heroic feats and be chosen by the gods to become Valkyrie? I laughed at the church's methods. I wasn't a theologian, I was a scientific mage. As long as I had enough experimental materials, such mystical things could still be transformed into actual experimental data and conclusions. And so, I set my sights on several famous heroes. Through various methods of tempering, scheming, and cruel battles, I had them die at the most glorious moment of their lives. The first few dozen heroes only provided me with undead subordinates that were far above average in quality. However, the priest named 219 actually succeeded in transforming into Valkyrie, and I recorded the entire process of his transformation. Sacrifice. In the face of despair, he ignited himself in order to protect his companions. A wall of light blocked the undead from invading, and at that moment, he also died. The world's recognition? A venerated spirit? No, no. As I've said before, we mages don't believe in such mystical things. With sufficient data and samples, we can find out the truth behind those hypocritical slogans. The spirit and resolution of sacrifice, virtue, or rather, stubbornness, or more accurately, intense emotions so intense that they can interfere with the world. I never expected that it would be the same thing as the creation of natural undead. Although I had such a conclusion, as a strict researcher, I naturally had to be careful in verifying it. And so, I'm unwilling to die here. I still have things to do. Is my sacrifice really meaningful? When I used undead magic to repeatedly inject these intense consciousnesses into an individual, causing them to explode with intense emotions before they died, theoretically speaking, I should have been able to obtain an artificial Valkyrie. In the end, I failed. What I obtained was the most berserk evil spirits. They furiously attacked everything before them, and this still didn't explain why the soul would increase in mass. After all, even if a powerful stubbornness ensured the soul's completeness, where did the extra mass come from? And so, I repeatedly thought back to that successful heroic spirit 219 and completely simulated the environment of that heroic spirit 219. However, I removed certain conditions one by one in hopes that I could find the critical point that I had overlooked. It was likely that during those 2 years, the Holy Church would have been quite confused as to why 7 or 8 heroic spirits would suddenly appear in a single year that hadn't been seen for 10 years. Not only that, more than 10 times the number of elite priests would suddenly die. Finally, after I removed one of the crucial conditions, it was impossible to successfully create an artificial Valkyrie. I also found the lost orb. His heroic deeds were passed down by the world, and his descendants were proud of him. So that's the important point. Valkyrie must be perceived by others. My eulogy for Valkyrie was another proof of my research. Making one's deeds known by others, preferably witnessed by others before one's death, was a necessary condition for one to become a Valkyrie. In that case, could a fake legend combined with a hypnotized hero really become a Valkyrie? If it was possible, then my conclusion seemed to be correct. And in the end, as I laughed maniacally, the first artificial Valkyrie in history, the Dragonslayer King Sven, was born and became the god of holy lights Valkyrie. And 5 years later, in my intentionally arranged second encounter with Sven, I conducted a second experiment. That unlucky person whose hypnosis I removed discovered that he was only a despicable murderer and instantly transformed into a holy firework. This also proved that Valkyrie's stubbornness was necessary. And at the same time, it also proved that the Holy Church's explanation of souls and Valkyrie was complete bullshit. Finally, after many more experiments, my conclusion was the closest to the truth. No Wondersoul worlds are able to distort reality. In this world, human nature, knowledge, beliefs, and stubbornness are all part of one's power. They can become nutrients for one's soul, making it complete and able to resist the corrosion of negative energy. And after reaching a certain level, one can even transform into a Valkyrie form and begin to use positive energy. This also explained why those canned mages whose heads were filled with the spirit of a knight were still able to retain their moral character and wisdom even after transforming into undead. Their stubborn knight's virtue protected them in a way. Meanwhile, those lonely archmages who had incredibly high intelligence, yet had no experience with relationships and viewed their so-called beliefs as a joke, would naturally gradually lose their sense of self under the corrosion of negative energy. At the same time that I obtained this experimental result, I also understood the true nature of Valkyrie. For mages, knowledge was power. My infallible Defender also had the ability to temporarily transform undead into Valkyrie. This was absolutely unparalleled in the world. If that was all I had, then I would probably be the greatest heretic and blasphemer in the past 1,000 years. And if I added on the hypothesis that I came up with based on this conclusion, then I would probably be the greatest heretic ever since He created the world. Perhaps the so-called gods are the next stage of evolution for Valkyrie, which has gathered so-called beliefs and divine concepts. Doesn't that mean that the so-called venerated gods are just another type of undead? They were already dead the moment they ascended to the throne of God. The remaining ones are only soul shards that were kidnapped by beliefs and divine concepts. All right then, if I revealed the results of my research, perhaps half of the true God's believers in the world would be busy scolding me for spouting nonsense, while the other half would be busy trying to kill me. But I had proof my experiment was a success. That's right, it was Womian's. His successful ascension to godhood, even in the eyes of a powerful individual like Ale, was nothing more than a fluke. But only I knew that this was the final experiment to prove my theory, artificial gods. Sometimes I would think about what would happen if I spread this truth to the entire world. But I would give up after thinking about it. After all, most people wouldn't believe me. And if they really did, the world would probably be destroyed. Don't go any further. You've already reached the source. If you go any further, when Pandora's box is completely opened, the results of your research, that damned undead structure, might possibly destroy the entire world. Since I'm not doing anything, the world is destined to be destroyed. If I continue, it'll only be possible for the world to be destroyed, so let me continue. Thus, the 7 original sins came into being. Their material isn't considered outstanding. Bastion is a normal house dog. Audang is a random pile of corpses collected from the battlefield. Envy is a battleship made from inorganic materials. Greed is a normal undead slime. But I softly chanted the source of everything. For undead, the physical body wasn't as important as most undead mages thought. The soul was the foundation of everything. My undead structure, or perhaps I should change it to soul evolution, replaced the beliefs and beliefs that Valkyrie needed to evolve. What I gave them was the stubbornness of my soul. Valkyrie and the gods. What were idiots who were held hostage by beliefs and the knowledge of others? In the end, this continent would still be controlled by intelligent life forms with flesh and blood. What I gave the 7 deadly sins was freedom, the most basic human nature, and a soul that was more complete than that of a creator. From this standpoint, they were indeed my children. My blessings gave them limitless potential for evolution, allowing them to evolve into a soul that surpassed Valkyrie. And they would forever be a part of me, accompanying me until the end of the world. The 7 deadly sins? That's the most basic human nature. Wrath, anger, and judgment against the unjust, gluttony, desire for physical body evolution, lust, overflowing love, jealousy, desire for others' strengths and possessions, arrogance, desire to be superior. Children, let me see just how far you'll go after you possess a soul that's even more complete than that of a god. Although all undead emperors are insane, you're probably the craziest among all undead emperors, aren't you, Roland? Your Majesty? In this world, the only person who had ever seen the true results of my research was probably Harlois, who was bound to me. And right now, I needed this assistant to serve me. After I provided her with all this information, Harloise actually used the respectful way a lesser undead lord would address an undead emperor. I'm still inferior to you in this aspect, but I won't lose. I have my own understanding of undead magic as well. One day, I'll use my own research results to become an undead emperor as well. Haha, I really look forward to your research results. But right now, please help me. I need your accumulated knowledge and experimental data. Help you? In this campsite that's filled with undead? Oh, you intend to create undead creatures. Original sin level? No, not at all. It's just that you seem to have a lot of materials and want to create something slightly interesting. Although it won't be original sin level, it doesn't mean it won't have the destructive power of original sin. It was likely that none of the undead knew that due to a certain someone's sudden decision, they were in deep trouble. Chapter 336. Disappeared again? How could this be? Although it was hard for him to express any surprise with his skeletal face, Edwin still couldn't believe what he'd just heard. It was now midnight of the second day since Great Lord Davy's army had started gathering. What was unbelievable was that more and more people had gone missing in the camp. If it was just an ordinary low-level undead that had gone missing, then perhaps they would naturally fall apart as they walked. It wouldn't be a big deal. If it was a mid-level undead that had gone missing, then perhaps there were strong hunters hunting in the dark. That was understandable, but it was, yes, one side of Great Lord Cabin's camp in the Southwest District is empty. The tents are there, the equipment is there, and even everyone's personal belongings are there, but there's no one there. The informant was a ghost. His expression was indistinct, but the flickering shadow shell showed his agitated heart. How is this possible? This is the 37th time that the army has gone missing. High-level undead are patrolling the area, but they're still missing. Right, does Great Lord Cabin know? This was a wonderful irony. The undead had actually encountered a ghost story. They couldn't understand how their comrades had disappeared without a trace. If they'd been ambushed, how could they just disappear without any reaction? There weren't even any signs of battle. If it was any other race, it might have been a large-scale psychic attack, but the undead were immune to psychic magic. How could they just disappear without a trace? Great Lord Cabin. Great Lord Cabin was in the camp at the time. He's also gone missing. The Lich stood up abruptly, and the soul fire in his eye sockets flickered continuously. A low-level undead that suddenly disappeared was nothing. But how could an undead lord that was at least a legendary rank or above disappear just like that? Caborn's strength was definitely not below his. If Caborn could suddenly disappear, how could he be considered safe? To be able to instantly kill an undead lord while he was on guard and not leave any traces? And now that several important figures were repeatedly scanning the camp, even though he hadn't felt the threat of death for a long time, Edwin still felt a chill run down his spine, as if something was spying on him in the dark night. Actually, I do have some clues, but I'm not sure. The ripples of the shadow grew stronger, as if the secret contained within made him unable to control his agitated emotions. What did you find? Tell me. The Lich's anxious emotions made it so that it took the initiative to face the specter. It grabbed the specter's incorporeal body and asked urgently. That is, before he could finish his sentence, the Lich noticed that the shadows were beginning to dissipate. The dark wind filled the room with smoke, and the soundless wails were the screams of the souls. It seemed that some curse had been triggered, and the souls were beginning to die. Speak. I order you to speak. The Lich Edwin hurriedly moved closer to the specter, pouring large amounts of negative energy into his arm to protect his dissipating body. However, he soon discovered that something was wrong. The negative energy he sent out was like a stone sinking into the ocean. He found that he was unable to retract his outstretched arm, and the shadow completely transformed into black mist. The black mist once again transformed into distorted faces, and some of those faces were so familiar. The hoarse voice of the soul reverberated in the room, devoid of any emotion. Join us. Why is it you? Cabin. The most attention-grabbing face was the undead lord who had just disappeared. Feeling that the situation was bad, Edwin immediately tried to cast a defensive spell, but there was no response at all. When the black mist completely dissipated, the Lich's tent was completely empty. As long as the window was open, there would be the night wind blowing, and the pages of the diary on the desk would flip as if the owner of the tent had just been here. Did you hear? So many undead are disappearing tonight. How scary. This time, there's actually a Lich. I heard that not only is he gone, even his phylactery is empty. It's actually possible to make a Lich with a phylactery disappear so mysteriously. How scary. What are you afraid of? You're not an undead. It was obvious that the dwarf big sister, Mary, wasn't interested in Betty's exclamation. She had already stopped drinking for 2 days after being trapped in the campsite, and her face was filled with fatigue and depression. She said that this was a dwarf's habit, and that she would be fine in 2 days. But I knew that this was simply alcohol poisoning caused by excessive drinking, and she would be fine in 2 days. Or, she wasn't wrong, and it was just the habitual alcohol poisoning of her entire tribe. I just finished setting up a trading channel. Those undead really do have a lot of goods, especially those intelligent undead. As long as they have some outdated journals and books, they can be exchanged for a lot of valuable magical information and gold. That Lich promised to introduce me to a big boss, a Lich, but that boss directly disappeared and canceled the meeting. That bastard still owes me 2 silver coins, and he intends to use an enchanted cursed skull to exchange for it. First of all, enchanted cursed skulls are precious, undead magic materials. You're a true god's priest, and you're no different from blaspheming a god by wearing one. That thing costs at least tens of thousands of gold coins, and you intend to buy it for only 2 silver coins? Aren't you being too unscrupulous? How should I say this? As expected of the goddess of wealth's priest, you're even able to earn money from the dead. Right, I can sell amulets that have been blessed by a true god. Everyone's in a panic right now. Ghosts are in a panic, so I'll definitely sell them. Just don't go overboard and get discovered. Right. Have you noticed that many undead have become sluggish recently? It seems like they're quite lost. All right then, not only could I earn money, but I could also spread my teachings. Perhaps I might even be able to poach a few believers from the undead. Let's not talk about how greedy the goddess of wealth was, and my research was already on the right track. In the center of the room, there was a decaying stone tombstone. There were all sorts of spell formations around it, and a silly cat was writing and drawing around it to maintain it. How inconceivable. Such a small tombstone is the core of a grave earth demon. Grave earth demons were one of my harvests from the Cloud Tower. They were super undead creatures created according to ancient techniques. Grave earth demons were mystical magical creatures that were usually the incarnation of a graveyard. Once they awakened, they would be at least a saint-ranked super undead war machine. Their combat strength and abilities would be determined by the size and history of the graveyard they were in. If it was a normal graveyard, well, it would be impossible to create a grave earth demon. Typically, only a graveyard with sufficient negative energy would be able to create a grave earth demon after more than 100 years of decay. And if a grave earth demon appeared on a battlefield that was at least 100 meters tall, then it would be a gigantic war machine that was over 100 meters tall. If a grave earth demon was created for a battle between gods, then it would have the corpses of semi-gods or semi-gods. That would be an existence that even a true god would have a headache over. Actually, one of the demon lords in the endless abyss of demons was a grave earth demon. However, it was said that this grave earth demon was naturally created. Ordinary undead mages viewed grave earth demons as undead magic creations. However, they didn't investigate the grave earth demon's origins. This was a common problem for most mages. They were used to the miracles of various mysterious creations, so they would never ask why. This was a type of calmness that came from an overly developed magical civilization. However, due to the extravagant colors before them, they would also miss out on many hidden sceneries. The most inconceivable part about a grave earth demon was its structure. It was created from graveyard soil that had an incredibly high amount of negative energy. This meant that although its body contained negative energy and corpses, 99% of its body was still made of the earth element. In that case, according to the most basic elemental theory, a grave earth demon should be an earth elemental creature. However, no matter which category it would always be viewed as a pure undead creature. Without a doubt, this went against the current mainstream undead research theory. Unlike my research method, which was based on the essence and foundation, most undead mages would start from the undead materials that they could see and touch. They were inclined to use better undead materials to create stronger undead creatures. According to my personal theory, this wasn't wrong. A strong soul must have a strong physical body in order to unleash its full potential. A positive soul must have a healthy body to sustain it. Otherwise, there would most likely be problems. However, this definitely wasn't everything about undead creations. The corpses of legend rank experts could often be used to create legend rank undead. However, this didn't mean that all legend rank undead needed to be created from the corpses of legend rank experts and above. In the eyes of most undead mages, this was an unquestionable truth. If one were to follow the classic undead creation model, it would be impossible to explain how a grave earth demon, which was 99% made of soil, could be so strong. Not only would it possess an unimaginably powerful desecration aura, it would also be able to become the undead supply and nurturing ground. Not to mention, it would be impossible to explain the source of its supernatural abilities. Perhaps they would say that the corpses within the grave earth demon played an important role. However, the corpses buried in the soil were undoubtedly a random combination of natural formations. If any random combination of materials could be used to create a magical creation, then it would be possible to create top-tier undead with large amounts of supernatural abilities. Why would there be a need for undead magic formations and undead mages? This in itself was a mockery of the classic undead creation theory. However, using my undead structure theory, I could explain it clearly. This was also the reason why I was so interested in grave earth demons. Only a sufficiently strong soul could drive such a powerful undead creature. Through research, it was confirmed that the soul didn't possess much intelligence. No, it should be said that it didn't have any memories or knowledge. It was like a newborn baby. Its soul was basically a blank space. For it to possess a soul of legend rank and above just after birth, this was simply inexplicable. This naturally reminded me of the river Styx that was able to reincarnate souls. After several experiments, I came to the conclusion that was closest to the truth. This soul wasn't a single individual in the grave earth. Instead, it was the amalgamation of countless individual remnant souls. The entire grave earth was its physical body, and the soul that came with it was born from this physical body. Perhaps the final conclusion was a little unorthodox, but I personally felt that it made some sense. Under the long-term corrosion of negative energy, the transformation from life to death was reversed. The bones of the deceased became the catalyst for the transformation. The sludge filled with bones completed the transformation from death to life. All the remnant souls combined, devouring each other to give birth to a collective consciousness. He was a newborn, so he was completely blank. He needed time and knowledge to help him mature into an adult. All right, since I now knew the theory behind how grave earth demons were created, was there any practical meaning to it? It wasn't like there were graves that were more than 100 years old everywhere. There were still many unknowns in the creation of a collective consciousness. Even if I wanted to mass-produce one, it would be impossible. However, only a third-rate technician would be able to create a finished product based on the blueprint and process. A true researcher would be able to modify the original design based on the theory behind it. If the materials were insufficient, they could find substitutes and even create a product that far surpassed the original. The formation of a grave earth demon requires two basic conditions. First, a large amount of negative energy must gather into a relatively independent individual. Second, there must be many relatively independent souls. From a certain standpoint, an undead army that gathers together meets these two basic conditions. They're a whole, an army, but they have countless independent soul shards, the undead themselves. Of course, just this alone wasn't enough. There were still many unsolved mysteries about how grave earth demons were created. Simply gathering the undead together wouldn't be enough to create a collective consciousness. That was why I made some modifications. Is the soul of that newborn grave earth demon inside this tombstone? No. He's only a soul shard of Little 3. He's a part that I split off for research purposes. A complete Little 3 would be useless since he already has his own physical body. However, this incomplete soul shard in front of me desires a complete one. Only then will I be able to accomplish my goal. He'll become the seed of this soul giant. The undead were connected to each other. The undead emperors controlled the undead lords. The undead lords used soul contracts to control the high-level undead, and the high-level undead controlled large numbers of the low-level undead. This was a conceptually established soul network, and the undead were the backbone of the undead army. If you looked at an undead army as an individual, then every member would be a cell. It was just that each cell would have its own independent consciousness. If one day, the collective consciousness awakened and ordered all its cells to listen to its commands, destroying the individual cell's consciousness, what would happen? Right now, Little 3 was the collective consciousness. What I needed to do was quite simple. All I needed to do was tell Little 3 that the entire undead army was his physical body, and that the soul network between the undead was his blood vessels and meridians. It was time for Little 3 to wake up. He's awakened. He needs a physical body. He needs the power of death gathered together. He needs all his cells to rearrange themselves according to his will. He's a prematurely born child with a congenital deficiency. He wants to be born. I didn't know what miraculous changes had occurred here, just like how no one knew how infants obtained their own consciousness and soul. Just how many miraculous processes were involved. All I did was satisfy the conditions for this phenomenon to occur, and then the phenomenon naturally occurred. However, to be honest, I don't know what the results of doing this will be. But don't you feel that it's more interesting because you don't know? An experiment that's destined to succeed is meaningless. The unknown is the most attractive. And if I succeed, I'll have a new understanding of undead structure. And now, my experiment had shown results. This entire camp and undead army had come to life. Little 3 cleansed the impurities in their bodies and perfected their souls and physical bodies. Little 3 ordered his blood vessels, torso, limbs, and organs to listen to his commands in order to create the most perfect body for himself. The undead gathered together with confusion in their eyes as they fused and devoured each other. They were unable to resist, nor would they resist, just like how a physical body was unable to resist the soul's command. Only the powerful individuals who had used their soul imprints to prove themselves to the world would be able to temporarily maintain their independence. However, the undead armies would automatically seek them out and transform them in nutrients. Since they were still a part of this undead army, it was only natural that they would be devoured without any resistance. A new soul was on the way to being born. As I was the leader of this experiment, I couldn't even finish recording my daily experiments. Countless inspirations flashed through my mind. It seemed that I was about to witness the birth of yet another excellent work. And this time, since this was an army that brought about war, I intended to call it Mars. Perhaps only a saint rank who used their own soul world to create their own soul world would be able to avoid being defined as a part of the undead army. Judging from the fact that a saint rank undead lord had already been unlucky, even such a standard wouldn't necessarily be enough. Of course, it was quite easy to refuse Mars summons. All you had to do was tell yourself that you weren't a part of the undead army, but rather an outsider. And then, Mars would naturally be unable to define you as a part of his physical body. But unfortunately, as long as I didn't say anything, not a single undead would be able to think of this. This was indeed quite unreasonable. But based on the beliefs of the Middle Ages, if someone prophesied that even metal creations could float and fly on water, that person would definitely be treated as a lunatic. Many seemingly unreasonable phenomena were simply the result of insufficient research. However, The results of my experiments could be used to deduce the underlying theory. If this experiment was truly successful, I would probably have to deduce the entire process in reverse, which would definitely yield many benefits. Have you thought about how you're going to end this? This thing is giving me the creeps. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to control him? Relax, I've already thought about it. You've already made preparations to control him? How did you do it? What did you do it? I should say that since I can't think of how to control him, I don't intend on controlling him at all. Will parents ever properly plan their newborn child's future? Let him grow up happily and freely. Yep, judging from his appetite, he's going to be a healthy and good child. He'll definitely be very healthy, but everyone else will definitely be very unhealthy. Don't make it sound like you're an idiot parent who's proud of your naughty child's excessive vigor. Can't you reflect on yourself a little? While he's still pregnant, he even ate a saint-ranked creature as nourishment. Have you ever thought about what kind of monster he'll become? High-level undead's physical body composition is obviously much better than negative energy soil. Have you ever thought about how powerful the undead lord's collective souls will be in the end? Both the soul and the physical body will have an exponential increase in power. Have you ever thought about how that thing basically has no upper limit? Have you ever thought about the fact that there's a 99% chance that you'll die? I told you before that if you don't stop creating undead, you'll destroy the world sooner or later. System notification. 5 justice points have been deducted from your retort fee. No need to thank me. Right? What do you think about me using my roaring form next time? Harloise had a calm expression as she nodded. She was already used to it. Your Majesty, you'll destroy the world sooner or later, really. Chapter 337. Spring was always short. After a few short periods of heavy rain, the weather gradually warmed up again. But compared to the Northlands, which was still bitterly cold, this place was obviously more suitable for humans to live in. At the very least, the wood spirits loved this type of climate. It was warm, humid, and full of sunlight. It was especially suitable for plants to grow here. But right now, a southern wind with the stench of rotting corpses began to blow. Dark clouds followed, and the temperature suddenly dropped, as if hinting that the warm summer wouldn't arrive so soon. At the very least, they still had to survive the fatal spring chill. Since the seeds of the Forest of Dreams resembled oak trees after they sprouted, the newly born Forest of Dreams had a nice-sounding name, Oaktown. As for the Guardians of the Forest of Dreams, the fact that the undead hadn't arrived yet caused them to simultaneously rejoice and worry. They were relieved that the shadow of war would arrive a few days later than expected. They had more time to prepare for war. They were worried that the longer they waited, the more astonishing the number and quality of the undead would be. The earliest estimate was that the undead would arrive 2 days ago, but they still hadn't seen any sign of them. Many veterans had already mentally prepared themselves. With so much time to prepare for war, it was highly likely that the undead had already gathered all of Night Rain City's frontline troops. The undead army that was about to arrive would be ridiculously large. It'd be great if they arrived 10 or 15 days later. I've heard that many people from a mage country are interested in justice points. Perhaps they'll join us. But judging from the thick smoke that suddenly rose in the distance, it was likely that the undead army hadn't arrived yet. The undead army had arrived. Before the dark clouds covered Oak Town, a Pegasus Knight landed first. Before he even landed, he was already loudly announcing his arrival. They're here! They're here! What was coming? Actually, everyone knew what was coming, but none of them panicked. Close the city gates. Notify all scouting and hunting teams to return to Oaktown. Nobody notified the wood spirits or the leaders. Hurry up and send a messenger. This was what adventurers were like. They were noisy and chaotic, but also full of motivation. Several minutes later, everyone learned that war was about to arrive and began to get busy. Actually, there was no need to hide the military situation. Seasoned warriors would be able to judge the size and arrival time of the undead army from the height of the sand and dust they kicked up. The undead's Vanguard Knight would arrive in about 2 hours. The warriors had long since been prepared and mobilized. A large number of bows and arrows were placed on top of the city wall. The archers began to adjust their bowstrings. the Ents rose from the ground, and the catapults began their final calculations. In less than an hour and a half, the first batch of skeleton knights arrived. The silent skeleton knight carried their rotten saddles and lances as they circled around the city walls, looking for gaps in the defense. If the enemy revealed a weak point, they would naturally become the spearhead of the ambush. However, in the end, they still retreated. Am I late? The Death Knight Haben finally gave up on his plans to forcefully attack. For the first time in his life, he doubted the undead Emperor's judgment when he saw the scene before him. Perhaps the Tark Republic had underestimated these plant life forms far too much. The roots of the sky-piercing tree brought the power of its mother, giving the newly born oak seed the power to mature. Meanwhile, the primal oak that gradually sprouted gave Oaktown new power. When the natural cycle was reconstructed, although Oaktown was still called Oaktown, in most people's eyes, it already had a fortress-level defense. The city walls grew taller and taller, as well as the patrols of Oaktown's trance. But let's not talk about these things for now. The most incomprehensible part was that this green fortress was now covered in greenery. The trees were growing at a visible rate, and forest after forest was formed in this wasteland. The wastelands of the past had now transformed into grasslands and forests. This was a miracle created by the overflowing power of nature. Soon, this forest would become nourishment for Oaktown's continued growth. The smaller creatures of nature would be absorbed by the larger cycle of nature. One cycle after another, the cycle would finally reach an equilibrium. At that time, just getting close to Oaktown would cause countless hostile gazes to stare at you. The Undead's Vanguard commander discovered that the enemy's defenses were complete, and that using the Skeleton Knights to forcefully attack Oaktown would only result in useless losses. So he unhesitatingly chose to retreat and wait for his main forces to arrive. Meanwhile, in a temporary mountain command center in Oaktown, the adventurer's leader was also discussing the current military situation. From a certain standpoint, the wood spirits were strictly adhering to their nature as NPCs. It was obvious that they lacked complete trust in the adventurers. Not only that, the wood spirits and the adventurers had completely different goals for their missions. The wood spirits hoped that Oaktown would grow stronger, and they wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice themselves. Meanwhile, the adventurers always pursued the greatest benefits for themselves. Naturally, two different leadership groups appeared in Oaktown. But judging from the current situation, they were still mainly cooperating and didn't have many disagreements. There were two sets of leaders. One was the Adventurers Alliance, while the other was the Wood Spirits decision-makers. To be honest, this was likely to be the most common form of cooperation between the contract heroes and the local factions in the future. The local factions would forever hope that their subordinates would be completely obedient, carrying out every order to the letter. From the employer's perspective, they would make the best use of their subordinates. It would be best to have temporary allies that could be bought with money as the most dangerous cannon fodder. They would definitely want to keep the direct subordinates that they had painstakingly nurtured. However, the Adventurers Alliance would need to think about their subordinates. The Adventurers Alliance would want to be able to obtain large profits without losing a single life. Since the adventurers' positions were different, there would naturally be differences. Cooperation, communication, and an appropriate amount of trust would be needed. There would be a faint relationship between superior and subordinate, but it wouldn't be absolute. Both sides would maintain a certain distance from each other, and they would all share the same goal. This seemed to be the best choice right now. This time, the Adventurers Alliance was composed of more than 10 veteran adventurers. Those who could speak were either the higher-ups of large mercenary groups or highly respected adventurers who represented the interests of the scattered adventurers. There's a total of 60,000 to 80,000 undead. Judging from their banners, there should be more than 10 undead demon lords. Their leader is Davy of Asalivis. Unlike the scattered adventurers who only saw the skeleton knight in front of them, the large mercenary groups all had their own methods of investigation. Some used aerial cavalry to patrol ahead of time, while others used prophecy mages to cast detection spells. The situation of the undead army's main force was already clear to everyone. When the various investigation methods gathered the information they obtained, they naturally came up with a rather reliable conclusion. However, the tent was still as silent as ever. This wasn't because the undead were too powerful, but rather, that can't be right. There are far too few undead. Could it be a trap? That's right. Unlike what they had expected, there were far fewer undead than expected. Originally, everyone had expected that all of Asalivis's undead lords would be mobilized, and the total undead army would likely exceed 1 million. However, only 1/10 of the undead lords had actually arrived. A pincer attack? A feint? Bait? Or perhaps they would just abandon this place and fight somewhere else. Many thoughts flashed through everyone's minds. However, because there were far too many possibilities, nobody dared to come to a conclusion. Suddenly, a messenger pigeon flew into the tent and landed on Kai's hand as he was still thinking. It would seem that our employer has an additional source of information. This was a message from the wood spirits. This meant that due to certain reasons, some undead lords refused to join the army, while some undead lords that had already gathered suddenly left the army. This was why the undead army's combat strength was so low, allowing the adventurers to rest easy and prepare for battle. Certain reasons? It would seem that our employer doesn't completely trust us. Right after Kai said this, some people were obviously dissatisfied. The adventurers were risking their lives and fighting for their employer, yet they were unable to obtain their employer's trust. It was only natural that they would be dissatisfied. A white-haired old man helplessly shook his head. He was Ero Simu, a former bishop of the Earth Mother Goddess's church. He was now a rather famous adventurer. To be honest, even we can't completely trust our companions. Not to mention, there was that incident earlier. He was obviously talking about the spy incident from a few days ago. Ever since this incident was exposed, many adventuring teams had become much more careful. Nobody knew if there were any undead spies among their own adventuring teams. I heard that as well. I heard that the wood spirits even invited some other helpers. I heard that it's someone who's ranked in the top 30 of the fairies' rankings. The famous general's ranking? That's impossible. The top 30 are all national treasures of every country. How could they possibly accept a mercenary? And if there really was a famous general, that person would have long since been given the authority to command. It's not like we don't know what's important. Did you all forget? The fairies don't just list the famous generals of every country. They have an even more authoritative ranking. The Calamity ranking? The top 30 of the Calamity ranking? Are you certain that you're here to help us and not to kill us all? Everyone instantly calmed down. The Calamity ranking meant that if you accidentally meet someone from the Calamity ranking, don't even think about fighting back, and don't even think about counterattacking. Hurry up and run for your life. The ones at the bottom of the Calamity ranking were all monsters like supreme, immemorial dragons that could easily crush ordinary semi-gods. And the ones in the top 30 were basically all 1,000-year-old monsters that were super troublesome and unkillable. Top 30? Willing to be hired? Is it the Plague King or the Volcano Tyrant? No matter which one it is, it's definitely not a good thing. The Plague King was a classical alchemist who specialized in potions. His first research topic was medicine that could cure plagues. However, due to certain reasons, the person he was hoping to cure ended up being burned alive as the source of the plague. As a doctor, he was declared a heretic and a blasphemer by the Holy Church and was constantly being hunted down. In the end, he really became a heretic. When he took revenge, he released a mutated virus that he had painstakingly cultivated, turning the entire parish of his enemy into a living hell. Now, the Plague King was wanted by more than 20 countries, yet he was still at large. The Volcano Tyrant was one of the few moving calamities that were still active on the continent and accepted employment from others. Of course, the people who hired him weren't to cure plagues, but to create plagues. Apart from the fact that he hated the Holy Church to the bone and would take revenge whenever he had the chance, the Volcano Tyrant was the most harmless of all the calamities. However, the reason why he was ranked 11th on the Calamity ranking was because he was rumored to be too weak to even fight a chicken. However, The moment he died, the various viruses he stored in his body would explode, reducing the entire population of Ike by 1 in 2. Even the Holy Church only dared to say that he was wanted. Nobody dared to actually take action. If the Plague King was a man-made calamity, then the Volcano Tyrant was a true calamity. The Volcano Tyrant was a gigantic magma scorpion that fed on geothermal heat. He lived in volcanic regions for a long time, and it was rumored that he had the ability to cause volcanoes to erupt at will. In reality, every time he appeared, there would always be a volcanic eruption. The magma scorpion had no enemies in this continent. Although it possessed high intelligence, it desired flesh, blood, and souls as delicacies. That was why it accepted employment in battle. Although it only accepted semi-god equipment and other similar treasures, and it wasn't as if the various countries' royalty couldn't afford to hire it, business had never been good. Apart from the fact that it required 700 sacrifices as a minimum appearance fee whenever it appeared on the battlefield, both sides would lose. After all, the fertile lakes they were fighting over had become volcanic regions, and the important strategic locations had become lava lakes. This was also a result of the Volcano Tyrant's heavy losses. It was precisely because of this that each country had a secret alliance with the Volcano Tyrant. Any country or individual that hired the Volcano Tyrant would become public enemy number one. However, there would always be people in this world who were at the end of their rope. Although the Volcano Tyrant didn't have much business, there would always be business every few decades. The Plague King was ranked in the top 20 on the Calamity rankings due to how important its life was. The Volcano Tyrant, who had caused countless tragedies, was only ranked 29th. From this, it could be seen just what kind of trash the top 30 on the Calamity rankings were. And now, it was rumored that the Wood Spirits had hired a Calamity ranked in the top 30, which was likely ranked even higher than the Volcano Tyrant. Naturally, all the adventurers were terrified. No, we need to ask the Wood Spirits about this. While the situation was in chaos, Kais received a letter from one of his own adventure group members. The information that he wanted to find out had already been obtained. As expected, that Wood Spirits are so cute team no longer has anyone at their campsite. Meanwhile, the undead were also quite busy. From a certain standpoint, I was beginning to admire and sympathize with that undead lord named Davy. The older one got, the more afraid they would be of death. Intelligent undead weren't all lunatics who didn't fear anything. When the list of missing undead appeared, many undead lords who wanted to ride on Davy's coattails now had to think about their futures. My apologies, I have some personal matters to take care of. I wish everyone good luck. It was likely that no undead lord would be willing to stay in the undead army until the reason for the disappearances was discovered. After all, it wasn't just low-level undead that had disappeared. There were even legend and saint-ranked undead lords and undead lords that had disappeared. However, even though Davy asked for help from the undead emperors, he received no response. In this situation, unless the reason for the disappearances was discovered and eradicated, nobody would be willing to mysteriously disappear like this. Even Davy himself was dumbfounded as he looked at the list of missing undead. However, it was impossible for him to back down now. He only had one chance. If he failed, the undead emperors wouldn't care about the reason. If he failed, he failed. Anything he didn't have would be thrown into the trash. Davy would lose everything he had, and he would even have to face the undead emperor's wrath. When news spread that the undead who had left were no longer miserably disappearing, even an idiot would realize that Davy had been targeted by some frightening existence. If he didn't want to take the risk, what should he do? The most important part was that Davy himself was still unable to come up with a plan to stabilize the undead's morale. To be honest, not only him, even I wouldn't be able to find anything wrong with the situation if I was in his position. War was still in its infancy. None of the undead's detection spells would be able to find anyone who hadn't been born yet. And the undead's contribution to the undead's fusion was an almost instinctive suicidal behavior. Perhaps a single summon would cause the undead's desire to go out for a stroll to automatically end. Such a situation was incredibly strange and impossible to guard against. If Davy was willing to disband his undead army and reorganize it, he would naturally be able to solve this problem. However, he didn't have the time to do so. And so, the undead army, which had originally numbered more than 300,000, was reduced to only 50 to 60,000. Most of them were Davy's direct subordinates, the type who had signed soul contracts with Davy. If Davy wanted them dead, he would be able to kill them with a single thought. But even so, Davy was still filled with confidence. Every day, the melodious sound of a violin could be heard coming from his residence. It seemed that this music-loving undead lord was still in a good mood, as he still held small concerts every day. But he's feeling guilty. He's intentionally acting the same as before, but he's actually revealing his true nature of cowardice. Indeed, since he's already on the battlefield, all he needs to do is raise his guard. Acting like this will only make him seem even more guilty. Harlois and I casually watched the commotion, but to be honest, I was still rather doubtful. After all, while the undead lords were willing to see Davy fall, the undead emperors wouldn't necessarily want to see the wood spirits expand. Davy could be summoned back in a battle that was certain to fail, and Davy himself wouldn't be so stubborn as to walk down a path that was clearly certain death. It would seem that Davy definitely had an ace up his sleeve that could turn things around. Chapter 338. What are you busy with? There's a war going on outside. Aren't you going to take a look? The necromancers used up a large amount of mana to summon dark clouds that blocked out the sun. The skeleton mages summoned their own kind, and a large number of cannon fodder directly entered the battlefield. The battle had already reached its climax, of course not. Although all of this was true, it wasn't the main point. The undead had indeed started a war against Oaktown. However, the strange part was that the undead didn't seem to have much fighting spirit. The battle wasn't that intense, and high-level undead, like abominations, weren't even sent out. Although undead mages could summon a sea of skeletons to drown out their enemies, this was a rather effective tactic. But at the very least, the sea of skeletons needed to be accompanied by a sufficient number of support and powerful undead in order to maximize their effectiveness. Simply summoning skeletons and attacking them would be the same as giving the enemy free targets and experience. Faced with this kind of fragile skeleton soldiers that were sent to the battlefield as soon as they were awakened, it would be a waste for the defenders to even use bows and arrows. They could just use the trance to throw stones at them. If a rolling stone were to roll along the slope, it would be like a bowling ball, sending broken bones flying all over the ground. Boring. It's still just a test. What's there to see? This was a battle where both sides were testing each other out. What results could be obtained? If you went up and wasted a round of ammunition, losing a few lives, and if you rushed down, you would also lose a few corpses. What are you doing? Adventurer evaluation system? What's this? I'm just adding a patch to the contract hero system. Patch. What are you up to this time? Yep. Things that are obtained too easily aren't treasure enough. And if everyone is treated the same, and everyone has the same status as a contract hero, that would actually be unfair to those who work hard. That's why I created this credit rating system. The more outstanding an employee is, the higher his or her credit rating will be. I chuckled as I said this. It was precisely because of that spy's appearance, as well as the fact that all the mercenary groups and adventurers were on guard against each other, that I discovered many inadequacies in my contract hero system. Why are you smiling so strangely? Honor? You're actually so kind? Why do I feel like you're trying to scam people again? No, I just recalled something interesting. What do you think about this system? 1 heart, 2 hearts, 3 hearts, 1 diamond, 2 diamonds, 1 crown, 2 crowns. What kind of messy pattern is this? Heart, diamond, crown, what's the connection between them? You probably don't understand this. This is a guarantee of credibility. It's the equivalent of gold coins, a sign of credibility. Although there were a lot of scammers and fakes later on, as well as professional counterfeiting teams that became completely unreliable, at least in the beginning, it was still quite authentic. Actually, it didn't really matter what image I used. Although I used the image of a certain treasure as a joke, the contract heroes really did need a slightly clearer credit rating system. In this world, There was no hierarchy between mercenary groups and mercenaries. Whether a mercenary could receive missions and gain the trust of the employer depended on their past reputation and connections. This was also why there were still people fighting over an empty shell of a mercenary group that had suffered heavy losses and was almost completely wiped out. The reputation that he had accumulated over hundreds of years was his greatest wealth. In order to establish a trust mechanism that could gain consensus, there must be a new review and deduction organization that was worthy of the people and the countries. This was obviously impossible in the past when the countries were divided. Mercenary guilds? Many mercenaries treated mercenary guilds as a neutral organization that collected intermediary fees and provided paid services. Many mercenaries even treated mercenary guilds like retired veterans and injured mercenaries. Mercenary guilds would provide mercenaries with alcohol, weapon repair, enchantments, mission introductions, and other services. But most of the time, mercenary guilds would have to rely on mercenaries to pay for their services. Mercenary guilds didn't have any forceful methods against mercenaries. This was what every country's royalty hoped for. Nobody would want a neutral mercenary guild to have its own will. If that happened, the royalty's power would become quite dangerous. Absolutely neutral. Focus on providing support services. This was probably what a mercenary guild should do. The end result was that mercenary guilds naturally lacked credibility in the eyes of adventurers and mercenaries. It was also impossible for countries to recognize other countries' mercenary guilds. That was why when people talked about certain mercenaries or adventurers, they could only say things like they have a great reputation or they sound really powerful. That was why mercenaries and adventurers lacked credibility and persuasiveness. The lack of a clear evaluation system wasn't a good thing for both employers and employees. After all, employers were afraid that the bodyguards they worked so hard to hire would turn out to be bandits, or that they would spend a lot of money to hire a group of seemingly powerful idiots. Mercenary group members were also afraid that their employers would treat them as expendable or cannon fodder. That was why high difficulty and high requirement missions were usually done by private introductions or by mercenary guilds. Veteran mercenary groups would only become stronger and stronger, and newcomers wouldn't be able to receive any decent missions. This doubtlessly restricted the growth of mercenaries and adventurers. If there was a trustworthy neutral evaluation system to evaluate mercenaries and adventurers, perhaps the situation would be much better. At the very least, a mercenary group with more than 90% positive reviews would be far more trustworthy than a mercenary group with more than 50% negative reviews. Why was it becoming more and more like Xbox? Evaluating a mercenary's individual strength and pay could also be related to their credit rating. For example, a mercenary who was able to increase his or her credit rating to Crown would at least prove that he or she had completed enough missions and received enough positive reviews. Naturally, he or she would be able to receive more pay and would be trustworthy. Besides, it's not just for those mercenaries. Look at the battlefield. Don't you feel that something's wrong? I'm not. I'm not interested in such a childish game. All right then, I knew that this guy was just saying it. Actually, I also felt that such small, probing attacks were quite boring. However, I did notice that something was wrong. In the past, even the most arduous missions would require several mercenary groups to work together. Previously, they lacked trust and understanding, so they would either use a middleman as the leader or form an alliance of leaders. Perhaps this would be enough to satisfy the small-scale battles before, but there are obvious limitations to this. If this continues, there will be many problems. That's right, as the contract heroes system expanded, and as the contract heroes grew in power and numbers, the scattered warriors would become more and more important. This battle to defend Oaktown was probably the first time that the contract heroes had become the main force. But in the future, it was possible that contract heroes would appear in other country-level battles. Continuing to use the old system would seem outdated and slow. This time, many problems had already been exposed. Just look at those warriors standing at the front. While they're receiving orders from the front lines, they're actually looking for people at the foot of the castle walls. They're probably waiting for their real boss's orders. And those archers are even stealing kills to earn points. They're only firing at high-point targets, wasting valuable ammunition. No matter how strong these contract heroes are, they're probably just a bunch of loose sand. Not mentioning the fact that there were enemy spies among the contract heroes. The contract heroes lacked trust in each other. They were all prideful and didn't like others. So how could they possibly trust someone else's orders? It was only natural that they would push the blame onto each other and push the blame onto others. On the battlefield, it would be quite fatal to lack absolute authority. Perhaps it wouldn't be so obvious when things were going well on the battlefield. But if things were going badly and the leader lacked authority or was filled with selfishness, it was highly likely that there would be internal strife and disobedience. In fact, there might even be betrayals or traitors. At the very least, the obvious problem right now was that there were far too many commanders. There were far too many people giving orders. Yet, everyone wanted to be a commander, not because they wanted to win the battle, but because they wanted their own people to earn points in a safe and stable location. That was why, apart from the reputation of each individual's job, there would also be special individuals who would be given the title of top-level commander or professional commander. This would make it easier for them to give orders, and it would also give them some role models and heroes, which would make it easier for us to control public opinion. However, when I explained this to Harloise, she had a different opinion. Why don't we just use a military rank system, such as sergeant, corporal, commander general, and so on? That would be more effective and direct. I could only smile wryly. It would seem that Harloise was quite talented in magic, but she definitely wasn't any good at politics. I still couldn't count on her for certain things. That would be too sensitive. It would be the equivalent of us creating an army. What do you think the royalty and churches of the various countries would think? That's right, I could guarantee that the moment we introduced a military rank system, our platform would immediately be boycotted by the various countries. Tisk, humans are so troublesome. I'm going out to take a look. Notify me if there's any change. Have some of my subordinates keep an eye on the high-level undead, especially those two living humans. Harloise turned around and left, leaving me behind with my frustrations. Creating a ranking system would directly affect the credibility and future of our Justice Point Alliance. Not only did we need to make it so obvious that it would be easy to control and obey, but it also couldn't be so strict that it would touch on the sensitive nerves of the various countries. The more I thought about it, the more troublesome it would be. How about we add likes? If you get 32 likes, your rating will be increased by 1 rank. Or, as long as you get a certain number of likes, you'll be officially recognized as a big X or something like that. Right, there's only the things that can be imagined, and there's nothing that can't be done. It seems that I also need to think of a way to prevent the existence of bad job judges. Chapter 339. Several dozen minutes later, the rain transformed into a downpour. This was weather that neither the attacking side nor the defending side wanted to encounter. But overall, the undead had the advantage. For the attacking side, reinforcements might arrive even later, and the attacking side soldiers would also be affected by the heavy rain, but it wouldn't actually have much of an effect. And for the defending side, this was doubtlessly the most annoying weather. With such a heavy rain, any ordinary attacking side would have long since rested for the time being. After all, the weather was still quite cold. Even a strong man in the prime of his life wouldn't be able to withstand the cold after being drenched in the rain. It would be quite possible for a weak man to fall sick. Even if it was just the coldness of the rain and the discomfort caused by the lack of vision, it was enough to severely affect the morale of the humans. It was common sense for any battlefield commander to never fight or march in a cold and wet rain unless absolutely necessary. Otherwise, not only would their combat strength be greatly reduced, it would also be quite troublesome to deal with the aftermath of the battle, and their overall combat strength would also be greatly reduced. Compared to the living, who were restricted by the environment, the already dead undead were much better off. The undead wouldn't fall sick, although they would hate the rain that would make their weapons wet and affect their vision, and their movements would slow down because of this, perhaps even searching for their missing eyeballs or teeth in the ditches on the ground. They wouldn't be unable to fight because of the heavy rain. Damn it! How much longer is this rain going to last? I wasn't annoyed because the battle would be difficult. For me, as long as the final result was acceptable, the process wasn't important. My subordinates and I had limited power. It wasn't that we didn't intend to become babysitters who would take care of everything. Since the contract heroes had the resolution to pay for rewards, they naturally had the resolution to die in battle. I didn't intend to interfere too much. Actually, it was impossible for me to interfere. After all, there were countless battlefields in this world, and the battles in the future would gradually escalate. At a certain point, even semi-gods would become commonplace. If I had to take care of every single detail, I wouldn't be able to do anything even if I worked myself to death. Since I hoped that these dimensional children and backup heroes would be able to swiftly grow stronger, I felt that I shouldn't interfere too much. True powerful individuals would have to fight their way through life and death situations. Unless the outcome was certain to be total annihilation, I didn't intend to interfere at all. The only reason he had come here was because Samantha and the others had entrusted him with the task. The only reason he had reduced the undead's forces was because he wanted to do an experiment. Roland, don't you know how ugly it is for a man to act Sundara? I ignored the silly cat's comment. I wasn't the type of person who would willingly become a nanny for a young brat. Right now, I was only annoyed that the heavy rain had interrupted my experimental plans, which made me even more displeased. Is there a way to disperse the fog? No, I'm not Great Droll. They're the ones who are good at controlling the weather. Don't you have Eagle Storm? Let him try. Although it was the expected answer, it was still very disappointing. As long as one was prepared, a mage would indeed be capable of anything. However, the prerequisite was that sufficient preparations were required. At the very least, I knew that the Cloud Tower's mages had the ability to control the weather around the city. However, they would need support facilities and mage towers to help them. Also, Mega AoE spells related to the weather were a major type of forbidden spell, but they would require at least a semi-god mage and sufficient time to cast them. However, Harloise was still only a gold mage. A magical pet wouldn't be able to surpass its master. Even if she had any spells, she wouldn't be able to use them without basic power levels. Still, it was rare for me to catch her in a sore spot, so I definitely wouldn't let her off the hook verbally. TSK, so useless. You mean Eagle Storm? Not to mention that he's already gone to the Bardi Empire. Even if he's here, a legend-ranked drool won't be able to do anything about this situation. It's all because you're so useless that you're dragging me down. In that case, let's start the battle ahead of schedule. Won't that make it a premature baby? I'm still hoping that it'll be able to obtain enough soul nourishment in the battle. I reject it. You should also have a way to change the weather, right? Yes, it's possible to turn a rainstorm into a snowstorm. Perhaps it'll even make the headlines in spring. But what will happen afterwards? Will be a competition to see who freezes to death first. I feel that out of all species, the undead who don't eat, drink, or feel pain will definitely win in this competition for survival. All right, then, as I and Harloise stared at each other, it was confirmed that neither of us had any method to change the situation. Asterisk boom. Asterisk suddenly. There was a loud clap of thunder. However, the strange thing was that it originated from the ground. A bolt of lightning shot from the ground into the sky, piercing through the dark clouds. Asterisk boom. Asterisk after a series of explosions, lightning flashed everywhere, and thunder roared. But right after some tremors, the dark clouds suddenly dispersed, and everything returned to normal. This was obviously an unnatural result, but that's strange. Isn't that the undead's camp? An undead boss managed to dispel the dark clouds? They're suicidal. Although this was the undead army's headquarters, it was still nothing more than a few temporary, low-level spiritual towers. And in the middle of this messy camp, there was a 2-story white bungalow that was especially attractive. There were flowers and plants growing next to the bungalow, and there were even servants taking care of them. Eanes was patiently tending to the flowers and plants, while Hatley was still in the posture of throwing his spear, as if he was itching to try again. The true owner of this bungalow barged in. "My two lords, you're Although he intentionally kept his tone calm, his old face was scrunched up. At this moment, he was truly angered to the extreme. It was no wonder why he was so angry. He had such a terrible hand, and it was so rare for him to encounter such a heaven-sent opportunity. Yet, it was directly ruined by someone on his side. Even a holy apostle would be angered to the point of breaking their precepts, not to mention an undead lord who definitely wasn't a good person to begin with. However, Davy's hand stopped midway. It wasn't that he didn't want to get angry, but that there was nothing he could do even if he got angry. He definitely wouldn't be able to defeat the undead lords, and he didn't dare to offend them. The two Titan giants were only incarnations of their wills, which were similar to the gods' divine power incarnations. The power they could use was limited, but even the weakest of them would be semi-gods who had reached the bottleneck of the world. Not to mention Lord Davy, even an undead emperor wouldn't be confident in victory. If the elemental tide increased, the bottleneck would increase even further. How powerful would the Titan giants become, and how far they would be able to go in the mortal plane? Nobody knew for sure apart from those ancient existences. For the sake of obtaining victory in this battle, for the sake of obtaining the undead emperor's trust and favor, Davy had gambled everything. Over the past few days, he had spared no expense in taking care of these two ultimate aces. Tired from marching? Fine, we'll use a palanquin. You think the undead smell bad? We'll grab a few humans to carry the palanquin. What? You don't want dirty males? Fine, we'll go grab a young woman. You think the house is dirty and messy? All right, we had an alchemist and mage, an undead knight as the coolie, a high-level earth element lich as the bricklayer, and an old artist who was several hundred years old as the chief designer. The house had a warm rural style with a modern minimalist style. It was basically a perfect work of art. Along with the house, we also received a century-old butler from certain royalty, a small team of banshee servants, possessed elves, a skeleton violinist, an undead lord who had once been a master artist, and a gardener. You think the house is too noisy? Fine, our army made way for the two of you. We even specially built a soundproof wall for the two of you. You said it was lacking in life again? Fine, the undead army went out in full force and finally managed to capture several vicious beasts. Only a single silver-ranked lion was left behind, which became Hatley's pet. They even planted flowers and plants around the house, and did a good job of keeping it clean and green. Were these still the evil undead that would cause the living to pale at the mere mention of them? Just where did these ace servants come from? How is this even external help? It's like we've hired two fathers. But at this point, Davy knew that even if it was a father, he could only endure it. There was no way out for him now. Behind him was a bottomless abyss. What do the two of you mean by this? Could it be that Davy didn't take good care of the house? Are the two of you dissatisfied? Davy did his best to suppress the anger in his heart, finally transforming it into a rather calm question. But by the time he reached the last few words, he was still unable to suppress his tone. The question turned into an interrogative one with obvious dissatisfaction. Flowers? Flowers? As expected of foolish undead. Brotherines means that the rain is blocking the sun, so the flowers can't even bloom. At hashtag yin int. If one had to use words to describe Davy's current feelings, the only word that could be used was a bunch of random code. At this moment, a mysterious sense of grievance gathered in Davy's eyes. It was far too pitiful for an undead lord to be reduced to such a state. If Davy still had tear ducts, he would definitely be crying right now. Davy could faintly see his future. Perhaps he would still be able to leave his name in the annals of history, but it wouldn't be as Asso's successor or as the wise one that he dreamed of. Instead, it would be as the stupidest undead lord in history. Davy had been born as a low-level demonic ghost and worked hard for thousands of years, only to receive such an ending. Meanwhile, Hatley smiled as he walked over and patted the old demonic ghost's shoulder. We're tired of staying outside as well. It's time for us to leave. Right, leave this house behind and find two dragons to hold it down. Perhaps we'll need it the next time we meet. At this moment, the old demonic ghost's face twisted together. He had never hated someone so much before. He was angrily shouting and cursing in his heart, but he was also hesitating whether or not he should hug Hatley's leg and beg Hatley to stay behind. Hatley was his final hope of survival. Finally, it seemed that he had toyed with the demonic ghost too much. Even Eanes couldn't bear to watch any longer. Aren't they just some little things? Before we leave, we'll flatten this entire city. Brother Eanes is so soft-hearted. Huh. Lowly undead, if you dare to deceive the descendants of the earth again and have us become your fighters, perhaps before we destroy you and your army, we'll let you have a taste of the Titan's wrath and have you howl in pain in hell for thousands of years. The Thunder Giant's soft words transformed into a thunderous roar in the end. The Thunder Giant returned to the mortal world amidst a flurry of lightning. His eyes, which were filled with lightning, were now staring at the nearby Oak City. Little things, come and play with me for a bit. At this moment, the demonic ghost lord was sprawled on the ground. Even he was unable to withstand the sudden change from great sorrow to great joy. He was currently lying on the ground like a ghoul of the same species, panting with his tongue hanging out. The image of wisdom that he had accumulated over the years had been destroyed in a single day. The Thunder Giant was also quite intelligent. Compared to the Titan Giants who had at least tens of thousands of years of experience in scheming, the old demonic ghost could only be considered an amateur. Only now did he realize that the two Titan Giants had been toying with him from the very beginning. All of his scheming had been treated as a joke by the Titan Giants. Even the so-called undead closest to Osso was nothing more than a joke. But when he saw the Thunder Giant that reached the heavens, he felt that the Titan Giants were basically invincible in terms of combat strength. He heaved a sigh of relief. At the very least, I'll be able to destroy Oak City and report back to the undead emperors. Chapter 340. Titan Giants? Arrogant. They look down on all other species. No, not only do they look down on other species, they believe that letting other species breathe under their noses instead of just stepping on them is a form of tolerance and grace. This was the evaluation of the Titan Giants by a certain powerful individual who had also experienced the primordial era. From a certain standpoint, being able to use arrogance to describe a species was already saying a lot. This could actually be seen from the giants of the Titan tribe. The superior giants, such as the Cloud Giants and Lava Giants, even looked down on the Dragon tribe and called them lizards. They were even more overboard towards the Silver tribe and the Bronze tribe. They directly called the other races mortals, tiny things, or little meat people, viewing them as backup food. But looking at it from another angle, they indeed had the right to be arrogant. They were naturally powerful. Even an ordinary mountain giant could easily defeat a human warrior who had cultivated for an entire lifetime. Even the frost giants, who weren't considered the strongest among the giant species, enjoyed hunting white dragons. They were the top human heroes who had done heroic deeds that could be recorded in the history books. But that wasn't all. A species' strength couldn't be solely due to a God-given ability. The Titan Giants had once created a glorious civilization on this continent. Even now, we could still see a thing or two from the Cloud Giants, who were good at singing and dancing and loved art. The Eternal Desert still had historical ruins from back in the day. The Titan Giants denied the authority of any other god apart from the creator gods. It was said that the Titan Giants had been transformed by Aichi using crystals from the earth. That was why they believed that they were the children of the earth, that the world had given birth to them, and that the other gods were only their peers or even descendants. Unlike the other species' religious culture, which was often associated with the gods, the Titan Giant statues mostly depicted their own deeds. Those strangely shaped drawings also recorded their understanding of the world. Omderoken's underground city was the classic Titan Giant style. It was a giant's palace. While the Titan Giants pursued simple colors that contrasted black and white, they also pursued low-key luxury with beautiful materials and beautiful designs. The Titan Giants' historical ruins and buildings were filled with statues and reliefs that displayed power and beauty, as well as strange drawings and three-dimensional structures that had unknown effects. Even in this era, this rather strange style still had a deep influence. For the nouveau riche, who lacked history, being ancient also represented nobility. The Titan style had once again become popular in human society more than 1,700 years ago. Spacious and majestic palaces filled the entire continent. Steps carved from white jade were filled with all sorts of mythological carvings. Actually, I'd always been rather puzzled. If you had carvings on the walls, people would occasionally look at them, but if you had carvings on the ground, you'd probably lose all sense of nobility. If no one looked at them, then wouldn't the carvings have been for nothing? Or were these carvings going to be used for archaeology by future generations? Cough. Let's save the comment about the golden toilet bowl. No matter which world it was, there were plenty of people who did this. As long as they liked it, it was enough. They were rich and willful. Getting back to the main topic, there was no such thing as an undying dynasty. The past glory would make the present's end seem even more pitiful. The former giant civilization had already become a thing of the past. Most of the current giant species only inherited the culture and techniques of killing. However, one would never underestimate them. After all, they were still the descendants of the Titans, the descendants of the earth. Before they were cursed with dullness, the fire giants, lava giants, and other fire element giants were the world's best blacksmiths. The sand giants' ancient buildings in the desert were still considered the world's wonders, and the frost giants were the best hunters. The polar wolves that they tamed back in the day were still viewed by the people of the polar pole as an unstoppable white calamity. Most species had lost most of their inheritance, and even most of their species had lost their intelligence. Yet, they were still able to survive. This was enough to show just how strong they had been in the past. Just how strong were the original Titans? Nobody could say for sure. However, it was publicly acknowledged that an adult Titan would definitely be no weaker than an immemorial dragon, Little Red. This was a most basic rule. But actually, I learned from Ale that the Titans had killed off more than a dozen true gods. Those ancient gods were all-powerful gods in the current era. In that case, the Titan's leader would probably be a main god-level existence like Ale. Still, I actually felt reassured that the Titans were so strong. Even if the sky collapsed, there would always be someone tall enough to hold it up. If a Titan truly appeared, there would definitely be a powerful god there to hold it up. There would be no way a small fry like me would be cannon fodder. By the way, if a super rare Titan beast that I hadn't seen in tens of thousands of years really appeared in front of me, then my luck, if I really meet a Titan, I'll stream myself swallowing a keyboard. I mean, swallowing a sword. But I never expected that I would actually meet one. Also, I really was a jinxer. Go ahead and swallow. Harlois always had a good memory for strange things, just like how I was always accurate at strange things. You seem to be my sword. Are you sure you want to see me swallow my sword? Or are you going to lick it first? Wow, this is quite the new way to play, but it's so perverted. Oomph. Right after I said that, the silly cat indeed quieted down. However, now wasn't the time to be playing with cats. I was also seriously trying to think of a solution as I looked at the sky-covering blue giant before me. The gigantic thunder giant was already walking towards the city walls. Every step he took caused the ground to shake and the city to shake. I could even sense his fear and despair. That day, humans recalled the terror of being controlled by those fellows and the humiliation of being imprisoned in bird cages. Stop joking around. Hurry up and think of a solution. Think of a solution? Wasn't I doing my best to think of a solution? It would be easier to think of a solution if I could liven up the atmosphere. That physical thunder reminded me that my opponent wasn't easy to deal with. Even if I didn't measure him, just looking at the thunder that was far stronger than atoms, I knew that no ordinary semi-god would be able to deal with him. And what was even more difficult to deal with in a Titan was, could it be that there are two Titan giants? Since the Titan giants are so arrogant that they don't even care about being on the same level as other life forms. In that case, those two humanoid fellows who were treated like kings are both Titan giants? I had long since noticed the two Titan giants who suddenly became Davy's guests. If my guess was correct, the Titan giant who suddenly appeared was naturally Davy. Hey, this isn't right. Don't you always send out cannon fodder first, then a mini-boss, then a mid-level boss, and finally a demon king? You're sending out the final boss right from the start? How can we have fun playing together? Huh, you're the only one who has the ability to comment. I directly ignored what Davy said. From a certain standpoint, if I had enough power, why would I just sit around and watch the situation? Let's test it out first. It can't possibly be the Titan Giants. It's impossible for them to completely appear in the mortal plane. And the dragons didn't have any information saying that they've already left the seal. How about we just wait for the town's security to descend? Then Oaktown will definitely be gone. Town security? This referred to the gods. From a certain standpoint, the gods were also the guardians of this world's natural laws. If any extraordinary existences that didn't belong to this world invaded and caused destruction, it was the gods' most basic duty to expel them. However, there were also major restrictions and rules. Just like last time when a demon count invaded the mortal plane, although the gods also had to send down their incarnations to deal with it, if I had waited for Rose, who was supposed to be in charge, to react, Sulphur Mountain City would definitely have been destroyed. The current situation was similar. This Titan Giant didn't directly interfere with any god's interests. Once the gods confirmed that the Titan Giant was the unlucky one and sent an incarnation to stop it, it was likely that the god would delay for a while and hope that this troublesome Titan Giant would disappear on its own. That way, they wouldn't embarrass themselves if they couldn't defeat the Titan Giant or waste their divine power for nothing. This was also why the Devil Lords often caused trouble in the mortal plane, but always managed to successfully escape. The gods can wait, but we can't. Hearing this, I could only smile wryly. Yes, it didn't matter to me, so I didn't care. But right now, we were the only ones who couldn't wait. Although I didn't want to be the contract hero's babysitter, no matter how I looked at it, this situation would only result in the complete annihilation of the contract heroes. If I just watched as the first batch of contract heroes died in large numbers due to a certain reason, the subsequent plans would definitely be greatly affected. A successful example would be just as effective as a failed example. Those who followed the trend would only look at the results and wouldn't consider any coincidences or unavoidable forces. At the very least, let's test the Titan Giant first. If it's a complete Titan Giant, I think it's better to organize an escape team right now. Even if it was only a test, directly attacking the Titan Giant would be foolish. I suddenly came up with an idea. If the Titan Giant was slightly more foolish, perhaps there would be an unexpected harvest. Ada, it's time to use you. Yes, my master. Several seconds later, my will was transmitted to my novice servant. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, an orange-red meteor streaked through the sky as an explosive fireball smashed into the back of the Titan Giant's head. When the gigantic Titan Giant turned around with a shocked expression, he discovered that the mage was right in the middle of the undead faction's military camp. Beside him, a group of undead was currently charging at him. Spears imbued with black corrosive magic were already thrown into the air. The heroic Death Knight activated the aura of desecration and curses, and the Skeleton Knight displayed his outstanding archery skills. This was the standard Undead Knight formation for an ambush. For the glory of Lord Davy, for the glory of Emperor Davy, die, Desecrator. Under the control of a soul contract, the Death Knight shouted the slogan of "I'll die for my master" as they charged at the gigantic Titan Giant. For some reason, this reminded me of an ancient knight charging at a windmill. Since the result would likely be the same, I might as well observe 2 seconds of silence for them. Asterisk, Z, 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 Z. Asterisk, all right then. In the next second, the Titan Giant simply waved his arm, causing berserk lightning to devour everything in front of him. The next moment, not even ashes were left of the undead knight. All that was left was a crystallized, charred pit. Davy, how dare you? But the next moment, he strangely regained his calm and continued his journey towards Oaktown. However, the pitiful Davy once again experienced great joy and sorrow when he witnessed such a dramatic scene next to the small white house. If he was still alive, and if his heart could still beat, he would have been tormented to the point where his heart stopped beating. He would have been hovering between life and death again. Thunder's angry roars were still echoing in his ears. Being called out by Harley was a powerful and authoritative statement in and of itself. Davy was shocked to the core, just like how a snake would stare at a frog. However, Eames chuckled as he reached out and patted Davy, freeing him. "I finally caught you." The next moment, Eames vanished with Davy, and then, how could this be? He directly appeared in front of me. That's right, the Titan Giant had found me. Don't be so astonished. That'll only lower my evaluation of you. You're the first person to be able to play tricks right in front of me without being discovered after so many days. Be proud, mortal. I, Eames, the fourth Titan Giant, grant you the honor of being able to converse with me. His long hair fluttered in the wind as Eames' ethereal eyes looked directly at me. However, it was as if he was looking past me and directly at the distant starry sky. This annoying feeling was quite familiar. No wonder he was able to find me. Prophecy ability? Didn't you say that I can't use it anymore? No, this isn't a spell. Your attack was the cause, and the fact that my cute little brother was attacked was the effect. I was merely investigating the source. You followed your instincts to the source. What an enviable talent. Mages who specialized in prophecy would probably find it inconceivable. Is this a common ability of the Titan Giant species, or is it something unique to you? Out of all my brothers, I'm probably the only one who knows how to do this. However, I'm quite interested in how you made those undead vanish. Vanishing is both a cause and an effect. This is the first time I've ever seen such an incomprehensible phenomenon. Could you tell me how you did it? Although we were conversing, we were also doing our best to probe each other. You don't seem that strong, but the strange thing is that my instincts are telling me that you're dangerous. It seems that you can threaten me? No, my sense of danger is even stronger. Do you have the ability to threaten my main body? The dimensional door in the void could open at any moment. And when frigid winter earth truly descended, only death would be left for me. The freezing flames that came with absolute zero should also be able to threaten the Titan Giants. However, I only opened a small crack in the dimensional door, and Eames already sensed it. It would be impossible to plot against such an opponent. He was truly difficult to deal with. Take a guess. Still, dying together with a Titan Giant does seem like a good deal. I narrow my eyes and lower my head, my ice magic sword already in my hand. I couldn't afford to be careless for even a moment against such an opponent. Since Eames could sense my killing intent, how could I not sense his killing intent as well? We seemed to be having a calm conversation, but in the background, there was a giant of light fighting against a small monster. The giant of light was the Thunder Titan Giant, while the vines and leaves transformed into a gigantic treant that resembled Jill. You, Emperor Roland. At this moment, Davy, who had been teleported away by Eames, finally recognized me. He had a complex expression as he watched me, as if he knew something. However, when he remembered that I was the one who had made him suffer so miserably, all his emotions transformed into hatred and anger. The demons stared at me, but an undead emperor's reputation was like a tree's shadow. An undead emperor's power over the undead was real, so Davy didn't dare to attack me at all. Actually, he was a myth-ranked undead, and he could easily defeat 10 of me. That was true under normal circumstances, but the prerequisite was that I didn't use my ultimate weapons. An undead emperor? An undead emperor who's alive? I'm becoming more and more interested in you. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in being gay at all, and I deeply detest muscular men. Bayana, stop watching. If you keep watching, we're going to lose, and the Contract Heroes plan will be ruined. You're going to go bankrupt. Finally, I decided to use this trump card that couldn't even be considered a trump card. Goddess of Wealth Bayana? How could she possibly be here? I suddenly shouted angrily at the sky, causing Harloise to pause in surprise. However, what astonished her even more was that she received a reply from a rather familiar female voice in the sky. Don't even think about making me go bankrupt. However, this is my territory. Even if a Titan Giant enters without permission, he'll have to pay a toll. Chapter 341. How did you know I was here? You have too many flaws. Do you really intend to hide it? This was one of the benefits of working together with others. When there was trouble, there would be others to share the burden. I meant share the responsibility. Actually, Betty, or should I say, Bayana's disguise was truly terrible. Forget about her sudden invitation to team up with me. It was understandable that she had divine powers and divine arts that surpassed her own silver rank. She could just pretend that she didn't see a cute boy or something. The most ridiculous part was that she was able to easily find me when I had left the team. Up until now, if I didn't want to be found, I would have done an excellent job of anti-detection. But even so, the fact that she was able to coincidentally meet me out of so many undead squads meant that she wasn't simple at all. There was a problem with the goddess of wealth's priestess. Since she was able to use divine arts, the first thing that came to mind was the goddess of wealth herself. And as ALS chief financial manager, it was indeed necessary for her to go to the front lines to check on the situation. At the very least, she would need to make a financial report. Naturally, she thought that Betty might be an incarnation of the goddess of wealth or a descendant of a holy angel. As long as she had her suspicions, the rest was simple. After all, we all had a boss. What if a middle-level leader suddenly attacked us? I would complain to the boss. Hey, is this Ale? I have something I'd like to ask you. This was probably how a middle-level manager would disguise herself and visit a lower-level department, only to receive a complaint from a lower-level employee that she was skipping work. The rest was simple. Since she liked to disguise herself, I would let her do it. At the very least, we were allies. Since we were together, it wouldn't be right for you to just watch if I was in trouble. Even if you didn't have any feelings for me, didn't you come down here for the sake of your business? You couldn't just stand by and watch if your business was threatened, right? By the way, I felt quite accomplished ordering this goddess of wealth to pour tea for me for the past few days. Goddess priestess Betty slowly walked out. She still had the same face, but her pupils had turned silver, and she looked a little holy. There's no need to be in such a hurry to expose such an excellent volunteer helper. You can use her to help you in trouble. Roland, that's probably what you're thinking. In that case, you wanted me to boil your bathwater for you yesterday, and you even want to take a bath with me. Were you intentionally torturing me? Yes, that's what I was thinking. I nodded and gave the silver-eyed goddess a big thumbs up, flashing a hearty smile and white teeth. What was there to hide from her? Mortal, you are so funny. But do you think that a false god can defeat us? Even in front of the silver-eyed goddess, Eanes still had a calm expression, as if he didn't care about the current situation at all. He waved his hand lightly, and a silver lion appeared. In the next moment, silver light twined around the lion's body, and the lion, which was clearly just an ordinary beast, suddenly grew bigger. 2 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters. Finally, the lion turned into a huge monster. Its whole body was covered in strange metal leather armor, but it had the majesty of a divine beast. The gigantic divine lion stared at Baena with a profound gaze. Its extravagant lion fur seemed like a metal crown. A low-intelligence wild beast had transformed into a highly intelligent divine beast. I could tell from the pressure it was giving off that this was a power level that surpassed the peak of the myth rank. In other words, it was likely that Baena was a semi-god. I doubted that she would be able to defeat this lion. In that case, false god, why don't you play with my pet? Seeing how Eanes casually transformed a wild beast into a divine beast, I recalled the Frost Giant's beast-taming abilities. Previously, I had many guesses about the Titan Giant's power. Perhaps some of them were correct. The Titan Giant's power was related to the Giant's special abilities, so we could guess the Titan Giant's power in reverse. The Cloud Giants had the ability to control storms, and so did that giant Ultraman. As for Eanes, he seemed to have the ability to control and strengthen ordinary wild beasts. Little Becky, can you defeat him? It wasn't that I was overthinking things, but I didn't have any confidence in defeating the goddess of wealth as she stood calmly on top of the lion's head. After all, in all the myths and legends related to her, she had never been known to be a good fighter. The goddess viciously glared at me. It was obvious that she wanted to settle the score with me. Since Baena was willing to appear here, it naturally meant that she had enough goodwill toward me. And since I had successfully shared the blame, I could finally be a little happier. She was acting as the town security, the manager of order. Even if she lost, there would naturally be a stronger town security, the higher-ups of the town security, to help her. There were also a few other troublemakers who were likely to be powerful as well. So what was there to worry about? No matter if you were a God's chosen who was capable of God's descent or a true God's incarnation, please do your best. I shall cheer for you. Yep, cheer from the bottom of my heart. Words were unnecessary, and there was no need to fight. Do your best. I believe that you'll definitely win. And so, I turned around and ran. Why did I have to run? When the Ultraman fought against the small monsters, the unlucky ones were always the bystanders and the surrounding buildings. But when a true God's incarnation fought against a Titan Giant's incarnation, wouldn't everything nearby be finished? What? At a time like this, I should shout for the goddess and then use my undying body to rush out and act as a meat shield? First of all, I wasn't one of those 5 abnormal, undying cockroaches. This was a battle that could easily be settled by a powerful individual. Why do the weaklings keep sending themselves over and over again? Wouldn't it be more normal to directly use the top-level combat strength to sweep through everything? Cough. Getting back to the topic, at a time like this, I shouldn't cause trouble for my companions. The War Angel incarnation gave me the ability to fly. It gave me the right to choose the battlefield. Behind me was an endless storm of energy, while in front of me was the scene of the Ultraman fighting against the small monsters. Or, to be more precise, it was the Ultraman viciously beating up the small monsters. Jill's vine transform was now smashed to smithereens. Although there wasn't much of a difference in size, there was far too much of a difference in power level. Just a single clash caused the vine treant to begin collapsing. And then, she was viciously beaten up. Although some of Oaktown's attacks landed on the Titan Giant directly ignored them. It seemed that this Titan Giant's magic resistance was rather ridiculous to be able to ignore 7-circle magic. Jill, you're so useless. But isn't this Ultraman going a bit too far? You're beating up your daughter in front of her father? Do you even want to live? All right then. I directly ignored Harloise, who was commenting on me. However, I was still blocked by the Titan Giant, Eanes, who was still unperturbed. It would seem that the Titan Giant alone was enough to block Bayana. TSK, I knew that none of those scammers would be reliable. Oh, what a sad conclusion. In fact, we still like you very much. This time, a pretty boy named Wandering Poet jumped out. What was his name again? Soros? It's Solin. Fine then, that's also a fake name. I'm actually the goddess of music and dance, as well as the guardian god of the Wood Elves. My name is Solinar. All right then, I knew that these guys were just messing around with me. But I figured that Solinar's gender was the same as Betty's. Since Solinar was a god, it was likely that he was faking it. Is your sexual orientation fake as well? Sorry, that's the real deal. All right then, I was deeply hesitating whether or not I should tell a certain Wood Elf sister that their guardian god was actually a gay man. But now that Solinar was here, it seemed that he would be of great help. Suddenly, a golden meteor streaked through the sky and smashed into the Ultraman's head. Right after that, a gigantic golden dwarf jumped onto the Titan Giant's head and started smashing it with his weapon. Huh, I actually have a chance to beat up my ancestor? And then, the battle between the Ultraman and the little monsters became a battle between the dwarves and the Ultraman. However, that weapon seemed rather familiar. It was round and bulging, and there was also the sound of water splashing. It seemed just like a golden wine barrel. Big Sister Mary? Mary, the goddess of iron hammers and wine barrels. She's also the guardian god of the shield dwarfs. Apart from her age, everything else is real, including those naughty brats at home. Jen, do you really think that someone who messes around to such an extent can become a god? He's nothing more than a wild barbarian. Actually, everyone has always been curious as to just how far he can go. You guys really have nothing better to do. Indeed. That's why Boss Ale wanted us to come down here and see for ourselves so that we could have a good foundation for the future. It would be best if we could meet up with you. Aren't we here now? All right then. So, Il was involved as well. But couldn't you guys just tell me directly? This would be quite interesting. It would indeed be quite interesting. Besides, aren't we supposed to be ambushes? If it weren't for the fact that we're here, the gay god took out a rainbow-colored 5-string zither and played it, causing a pleasant sound to ring out. He narrowed his eyes as he played a magical melody that caused the world before me to begin distorting. Go do what you need to do. I like to see just how strong the Titan Giants are. All right then. I took one last glance at Eanes before flying away. However, I had a premonition that this wouldn't be the first time we met. But right after that, I was blocked by someone else. It seemed that this person was actually someone in the same profession as me. Hello, Roland. I'm Zero. Perhaps you've heard of my name before. When a monster war unfolded outside Oaktown, the people inside the town were already dumbfounded. First, a primordial Titan giant appeared. Then, more and more gods appeared, each stronger than the last. In the end, it was as if the gods were fighting against each other. This was far beyond what the adventurers were capable of. Samantha was doing her best to maintain order in Oaktown. Meanwhile, the adventurers felt quite uneasy. That was because the situation was obviously out of control. Now that the gods had descended, the battle had reached a level that the adventurers were unable to reach. What the adventurers were worried about was that if they accidentally got involved, they would mysteriously end up as cannon fodder. However, there was one person who was worried about something completely different. According to our agreement, I should secretly open the city gates and let the undead enter. But is there any meaning to letting the undead enter the city now? Chapter 342. Her red mage robe was embroidered with precious magical runes, and her vine-entwined mage staff was actually inlaid with a red dragon crystal that beat like a heart. Although Archmage Chrissy wasn't particularly famous, she seemed to wear the label of being extraordinarily powerful or rich. And after she displayed outstanding fire magic abilities in several joint missions, she became a representative of the neutral adventurers and became one of the higher-ups of the undead army. Her flame-like hair, the charisma of a mature woman, and her pretty face even earned her the title of Fiery Sorceress. She even had a few loyal followers. But today, she was in a terrible mood, especially when she heard some news. Did you hear? This time, it seems that someone on the calamity rankings has appeared. When she heard this news, she thought that she had been exposed. But when she heard that they were searching for a spy, she was so scared that she broke into a cold sweat. That's right. Not only was she on the calamity rankings, she was also a spy for the undead. She was Molly? That's right. She was Molly, the former Dragon Queen Molly, and the current undead spy. Currently, the great majority of dragons in Ike lived in scattered territories. For example, Little Red had her own dragon nest and territory, as well as her own subordinates, manticores and other magical beasts. It could be said that every adult dragon with their own territory was their own lord. All they needed to do was enjoy the offerings and hunting from their subordinates, and then sleep on top of their treasures. That was all. Yet, it just so happened that dragons would become stronger by sleeping. They would reach the peak of the world as they grew older. This was why other ordinary species envied them, while giants looked down on them, mocking them as giant lizards that only knew how to hibernate. Without Dragon City, Molly was like an immemorial red dragon who had lost her territory. She only had herself to rely on. Since she had just arrived on the surface, she didn't know much about the situation here. In fact, she didn't even dare to steal other dragons' territory, afraid that her reputation would spread to the surface and she would be hunted down. Having already lost the underground Dragon City and having no subordinates or minions, the ambitious Molly decided to first settle down and build her own dragon nest and territory. However, hiring powerful subordinates would require treasures. Weak monsters wouldn't need them, and building a dragon nest would require money as well. Most importantly, how could an immemorial dragon not have a treasure vault befitting her status? That would be ridiculed by her own kind. Dragons won't lack money. The treasures of other kingdoms are our treasures. And so, she traveled above ground, raided cities to accumulate treasures, established her own faction, and built her own dragon nest. Then, in order to earn money, she even expanded her business to become a war mercenary. Not only did she become infamous far and wide, she was also ranked 99th on the Calamity rankings as the Crimson Apocalypse, an ancient dragon that was hired as a war mercenary and would occasionally commit acts of treachery. This was obviously a great humiliation for the dragons. She also seemed to realize that in order to avoid being hunted down by the dragons on the surface, she traveled everywhere and didn't have a fixed residence. Or perhaps it should be said that she went around committing crimes. In the end, she came to the Bardi capital to spend her days there. However, she never expected that the capital was currently on the highest state of alert. After she avoided the Dragon Knight's pursuit, she met with the undead emperors blocking the Bardi capital. And so, she discovered that she had been forced into a corner. Worried that she would transform into a bone dragon, she couldn't ask for help, so she thought of her daughter and sent out a distress signal. However, Aso and the others still blocked her way. Then, when she discovered that her opponents were undead emperors, she unhesitatingly surrendered, just like how she had so easily surrendered to a demon count. As long as she didn't become a bone dragon, everything was negotiable. From a certain standpoint, Molly, who had no sense of honor or bottom line, was indeed the shame of the dragons. As long as you serve us, all those items that are useless apart from glowing light will all be yours. For the undead emperors, the most valuable items they had accumulated over the years were some glowing stones. Even if they had money, they wouldn't be able to buy anything. It would be quite worth it to use these items to bribe a semi-god. And so, the undead's generosity caused Molly to unhesitatingly surrender and become the undead army's #1 guide. And right now, it was supposed to be time for her to lead the way. However, the moment she arrived at the city gate, someone called out her real name. Molly? Dragon Queen Molly? I'm Mises? The black-haired female ranger lowered her head to look at the red-haired female mage before her. She almost couldn't believe her eyes. She had originally been Roland's hidden ace to guard the city gate, but she never expected that she would meet her target here. Keep an eye on the city gate. I feel like there's definitely still a spy in the city. If anyone dares to approach the city gate without orders at a critical time, I'll immediately capture them and interrogate them. Roland's words echoed in her ears. The next instant, the female ranger who knew Molly like the back of her hand instantly imagined everything that had happened to Molly. Her astonished expression then turned into embarrassment and anger. Molly indeed felt that it was quite embarrassing to have such a mother. She had worked so hard to save Molly, only to encounter that Molly was a spy. She was so angry that she couldn't contain her anger. Molly! Molly casually lifted up the gigantic tray ant beside her and then viciously tossed it at Molly. The joyous reunion between mother and daughter instantly turned into mutual destruction. Molly was once again facing the greatest crisis of her life. Whenever you scheme against others, others will definitely scheme against you as well. While Roland was messing around with the undead army, there were also people observing the situation. Yep, when the information was sent to the higher-ups, they were able to guess what was going on. Only an undead emperor who's one rank higher is capable of fooling an undead lord and causing the undead to silently vanish from their own army. And so, someone came. She hid in the shadows and observed everything. She wasn't particularly interested in Oaktown, nor was she interested in the Tark Republic itself. She was only interested in a junior who was capable of forcing Aso to sacrifice himself. Contrary to what people guessed, the undead emperors didn't all have the same attitude towards returning to the Tark Republic. The Tark Republic had been scattered for countless eons. It was quite normal for the senators to have their own thoughts. Some had already settled down in the Tark Republic. Some believed that the past should be left in the past. Some didn't even have any memories of their homeland. And some were worried about what they would be once the Tark Republic was re-established. The ancient existences who didn't want to return to the Tark Republic only gave some support out of consideration for the Tark Republic. However, they didn't directly participate in the Tark Republic. There were also some neutral, undead emperors who didn't care whether or not they returned to the Tark Republic. That was why only the undead emperors from the Tark Republic and the neutral faction participated in the Tark Republic's return. There were a total of 13 undead emperors, but they were faintly divided into two factions. If Aso was the backbone of the Tark Republic's return faction, then Zero was the backbone of the neutral faction. Most of the time, Zero didn't take the initiative. Her death plane, which had an incredibly low temperature, was incredibly suitable for her to live in. She had only participated in the Tark Republic's return because of her personal friendship with Aso. And now, for the sake of her old friend, or perhaps one should call her old lover, she decided to personally find the murderer. Perhaps you've heard that my real name has already been forgotten. They all call me Zero. The lone undead emperor before me had no intention of hiding her true appearance. Silver light slowly flowed from her translucent body. She wore noble attire that was so ancient that it was unrecognizable, together with a gentleman's hat that was also from the same generation. She was slightly bowing in ancient etiquette. She was an ancient ghost who gave off a strong feeling of space-time disorder. Zero. Of course, I had heard of this name before. She was an undead emperor from the ice plane, one of my own kind. However, I never expected that she was a female ghost. It wasn't that I was biased against females. Fine, I was biased against ghosts. Out of all the undead, ghosts had quite a high starting point. However, they had the lowest growth rate. Unlike banshees whose souls had already materialized, ghosts were usually just shards of their own souls. They didn't have physical bodies, so they were immune to physical attacks, had powerful natural talents, such as negative energy, and so on. However, they were also quite difficult to use their physical bodies to improve themselves. Since they didn't have a physical body to protect their souls, they were also weak against light and positive energy. However, nobody would dare to underestimate Zero because of this. After all, the fact that she was an undead emperor spoke volumes, even if it was impossible for her to be in her complete form. Her slender phoenix eyes were smiling, as if she was looking at a junior that she admired. The ghost from the frost hell clapped her hands lightly. Although I have so much to say, I'll ask you to die for Aso's sake. My entire world instantly changed. This was a soul world that was almost real. I saw a vast expanse of white in front of me. A chilly wind kept blowing with snowflakes. Everything was frozen. This powerful feeling of being in a different world made me feel refreshed. Yes, I felt really comfortable. This land of ice and snow was also my home ground. I could sense how familiar the rules of this world were, just like the snowy mountain that Frigid Maw lived in. Her eyes didn't have any ill intentions as she looked at me. However, it was obvious that she wanted me to die. The undead emperor didn't intend to say anything else. She wanted me to die. Asterisk clap. Asterisk the white ghost king clapped her hands again, causing a chilly wind to blow. The temperature suddenly dropped again, instantly transforming humans into ice sculptures. Zero's soul world seemed simple, but it was actually incredibly fatal. Just the extremely low temperature alone was enough to kill all life. That's it. The ghost appeared rather disappointed. Aso had sent me a message before he died, but it seemed that he thought highly of this young man. If Zero died so easily, it would seem like Aso's judgment was too poor. Although I also want to play dead like this, it's far too rare to meet an undead emperor. It's even rarer to meet a senior who also cultivates ice magic. It would be such a waste to miss this opportunity. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Senior, please have a taste of my ice. Chapter 343. When so many things happened and the big bosses jumped out one after another, the original big boss was forgotten in the face of the sudden change in the situation. After sensing undead Emperor Zero's pressure, Davy was both delighted and anxious. It was evident that Zero hadn't informed him of her arrival at all. Not only that, how long had she been hiding in his army was another problem. I'm afraid that I've already lost the undead emperor's trust. Davy didn't have the time to be depressed. He needed to think of a way to overcome the current crisis. He looked around and saw that it was a battle between a giant and a god. Energy waves that were powerful enough to easily tear apart myth-ranked individuals were surging up and down. Davy didn't know what to do. Should he go help the two Titan giants? Judging from the battle situation, not to mention his subordinates, even Davy himself would be torn apart by the shockwaves. Even if he could help, he would likely be crushed by the powerful undead emperors. It was even possible that his own Titan giants would be annoyed and stomp him to death first. Should he go help Zero? First of all, how was he supposed to explain himself to an undead emperor? This undead emperor was famous for her indiscriminate AoE attacks. If Davy accidentally got involved and became an eternal ice sculpture, it was likely that no one would be kind enough to help him unfreeze. Davy was quite vexed, but he didn't know what to do. Should he go around the Ultraman battle outside the city and attack the city gates with two little monsters? That sounded like a good idea, but why were there two immemorial red dragons fighting against each other? A gigantic red dragon roared angrily in midair. Her falling body smashed through the city walls, and her leaking dragon breath transformed the ground into a sea of flames. Berserk draconic magic was destroying the undead army. These two female dragons became the fiercest targets of the undead army. On the other side of the city walls, a berserk dwarf was currently fighting against a thunder titan giant. Her warhammer and lightning spear kept clashing against each other. Nobody would be able to survive if they accidentally collided with each other. The most dangerous part of all was still the confrontation between the two undead emperors. Although it was impossible for them to be in perfect condition, just the natural difference in power levels made it so that Davy didn't dare to get close to the two undead emperors. Even though this was supposed to be my battle, I become a side character. These undead emperors are so willful. Many things that seemed accidental were actually inevitable. Davy did not see through them. During this period of time, if a large-scale war was started, there was a high chance that the big shots would personally take action. The creation of the contract heroes system, the descent of the new silver species, the awakening of the primordial titans, and the return of the undead republic. Any one of these events would be able to attract the attention of the entire world. When they all appeared together, they naturally attracted the attention of the various major factions. Davy's army's attack on the wood spirits was nothing more than a prelude. The Holy War was about to begin, and the current situation, time, and location were far too sensitive. Barty, which was the center of attention for many factions, would attract the attention of many factions. This was just like how every country was in a highly sensitive international situation. A major incident could erupt at any moment. When the fuse of this war was ignited, many experts jumped out for their own interests. They either wanted to protect their own interests from being sacrificed or had no goals at all. They only wanted to declare their existence and fight for the right to speak for the next part of the benefits. But for mortals, this was already an irresistible natural disaster. How about I go back to the headquarters first and take control of my army first? From a certain standpoint, this was obviously a wise choice. An undead lord without his army would lose 2/3 of his combat strength. Not only that, if he left this place, he wouldn't have to worry about being dragged into the battle between the big shots. Unfortunately, when he chose to return to his own army and give his entire sense of belonging to his own army, he triggered the final ticking time bomb. Here, the guy who brought about the end of the road had arrived. Edmund, didn't you go missing? This Lich who suddenly walked out from the shadows was Davy's old friend, as well as one of Davy's most loyal followers. Yet, Edmund had already gone missing half a month ago. Why would he suddenly appear in front of Davy? Could it be that there was a conclusion to his disappearance? Could it be that Edmund had discovered the truth? The floating Lich didn't respond to his old friend's question. He slowly walked over. His skeletal face was expressionless, as if the soul fire that had condensed was unable to reveal even a hint of emotion. Suddenly, Davy discovered that he had lost control of his physical body. He slowly walked over to Edmund. Along the way, Edmund had already lost his physical form. His entire body transformed into a pitch-black whirlwind of shadows. Why can't I move? Why do I feel joy? His soul screams had no sound. Davy opened his arms and voluntarily embraced the darkness. The black whirlwind instantly wrapped around him. Even though his soul still had the will to resist, he was unable to do anything. He could only watch as the black shadow swallowed him whole. It's time to merge. So this is how everyone goes missing. At this moment, Davy obtained a lot of new knowledge and met many old friends. He knew everything. However, this was the undead lord's final thought. From the very start, when Ward decided to use this entire army as food, Davy, who was at the highest point of the army, became the most important part. Davy himself would also become the core of War as knowledge base. The other myth-ranked undead would still have the possibility of escaping. However, for Davy, his identity as a member of the Undead Lord's army became a concept that bound him. Once all the effects were confirmed, the cause that was connected to all karma would naturally be unable to escape. The entire ground began to rumble as if some monster was digging its way out of the ground. Once the leader of the undead army was swallowed and his true master began to summon, the evil beast War finally began to awaken. I shook off the snow on my body as I looked playfully at the Spectre Emperor before me. As an expert in ice and snow magic, fine, let's just take it seriously. At the very least, I was half an ice and snow magic master. And even though I was only half an ice and snow magic master, I could more or less understand this undead emperor's path after coming into contact with ice and snow. Life Devourer, or more accurately, Heat Devourer. Ghost bodies were filled with negative energy. Coming into contact with them would cause weakness, loss of body temperature, and many other effects. Ghost Touch was a simple undead magic spell that mimicked coming into contact with a ghost filled with negative energy. People only noticed that Ghost Touch dealt negative energy damage to the living, but they didn't notice that it was also stealing away the living's body temperature. This seemed to be one of the natural abilities of ghosts. However, due to the slow effects, one had to come into contact with the ghost in order to use it. Also, using it multiple times would cause fatal effects. Only the incredibly weak ghosts would use such a useless natural ability. Even I had basically ignored this ability. But today, Senpai had taught me a lesson. There were no useless abilities, only weak users. At that moment, she stole away all the heat in the area and forcefully lowered the temperature of the entire area to an extremely low temperature. The icy mist that transformed into rain and snow was only a cover for her true trump card. If you treated it as an ordinary ice and snow magic and thought that you would be fine as long as you didn't come into contact with it, then you would be gravely mistaken. That icy mist wasn't an ultimate attack. What was truly powerful was the invisible and extremely low temperature. How amazing! She instantly lowered the temperature to negative 80 degrees Celsius. If I didn't know the principle and paid attention to the ice, I would probably be silently frozen solid. And this probably isn't even her complete form, as expected of Senpai, but the snow on his body had already turned into rainwater. The thin layer of ice armor isolated the other party's extremely low temperature. The coldest was its definition. Even if the temperature outside was negative 80 degrees Celsius, the 0-degree ice armor remained at 0 degrees Celsius. When I faced off against Omdaroken, this ice armor had helped me block out the damage from the calamity's freezing flames. Now, it was naturally capable of blocking out the low temperature for me. Such a low temperature is meaningless against me. Let's take a look at my world of ice and snow instead. I stabbed my magic sword into the ground as I spread out my silver wings. Beneath my ice armor was magma-like skin. After the arbiters descended, the door to the frigid winter earth was opened wide. Although this was still an alternate world where only ice and snow existed, Zero felt that her world had been stolen away. However, she wasn't shaken at all. Instead, she smiled with interest. It would have been disappointing if her world hadn't reached such a level. Asterisk clap. Asterisk with a clear clap. Countless flashing eyes lit up in the misty rain. It would seem that she was already using clap as a spell-casting action. The essence of ice began to gather as numerous undead awakened from the snowy mist. There were all sorts of undead, but the most frightening were two legend-ranked undead, the Winter Demons and the Shadow Wings. The Winter Demons were the incarnation of a blizzard. Any appearance would bring about a destructive natural disaster. Meanwhile, the Shadow Wings were legend-ranked mages that could easily transcend time and space. They were immune to all mages below the 9th circle and were the most dangerous shadow mages. Among these 30-odd winter devils and shadow wings, many of them had gone through their 2nd or 3rd evolution. That meant that they were saint rank or epic rank monsters. Even bringing an undead army of this level with them was worthy of praise for how rich they were. summoning a large number of undead creatures to keep the enemy busy when encountering an enemy. Then, they would think about their strategy. This was a common undead mage tactic. As for an undead emperor, it would be quite embarrassing if she didn't have a few top-level undead creatures with her. This army of top-level undead couldn't be underestimated. They glared at me viciously. Any ordinary undead mage would immediately summon a large group of undead to deal with them. This was the standard combat style for undead mages. They would use meat shields to slow down the enemy while they dealt debuffs and buffs to their own side. Undead mages' combat style was just like chess. Both sides would summon their chess pieces, test each other, and finally determine the advantage and obtain victory. I indeed had a few top-level undead with me, but I had no intentions of summoning them. Apart from the winter demons and shadow wings, the other undead are obviously 2 levels lower. The unique characteristic of these 2 types of undead is that the former are immune to ice magic, while the latter eat negative energy as food. Plus, Zero's ability to steal heat and her identity as an expert in ice magic made it obvious that Zero's combat style was quite similar to mine. If I summoned a large number of undead, she would use a large AoE forbidden spell to bombard the undead without distinguishing between friend and foe. That forbidden spell would most likely be a combination of ice and negative energy magic. Only these 2 types of undead would be able to survive after being bombarded by ice and negative energy. But if I didn't summon any meat shields at all, it would be too late by the time the undead surrounded me. Attack, attack, and attack, forcing the undead into my own rhythm. This was a blatant scheme, but it was indeed quite difficult to deal with. How interesting. In that case, let's summon the undead that are absolutely impossible to freeze. Come, War, meet your little friend. As I summoned Zero, the next moment I paused in surprise. But it wasn't that something had gone wrong with War. After I discovered that the enemy was too strong, I ordered War to complete the final devouring and was currently in the midst of awakening. Instead, System, why did you come out at such a time to make your existence known? Host has reached the peak of gold. You have activated more than 3 of your bloodline abilities. Your soul and physical body have perfectly fused together. Your soul imprint has been activated. Semi-god, undead, order, and divine items have been detected in the surroundings. Bloodline hunting quest, epic, activated. System notification. It's time to show the true value of this physical body. Show those titans who thought themselves to be perfect what a double diamond bloodline really is. Optional quest released. Choose one of 3. Bloodline evolution will occur based on the completion of the quest. Currently, your bloodline can only withstand 1 evolution. After your bloodline evolves completely, you will open the path to legend. Your war angel/original sin demon god transformation ability will evolve as well. Hunting quest 1. I am the real Lich King. My butt isn't glued to the ice throne. That's just a rumor. Destroy Zero's clone before you and steal her knowledge and the key to the ice dimensional plane. You will be able to improve further in your path of undead and ice. System notification. Go, young man. King Meow's beautiful future is waiting for you. Quest difficulty. Myth. Yes, the one before you isn't an undead emperor in her complete form. You have a chance at victory. Use your unscrupulous methods and despicable methods to steal the essence of your master's wife. Hunting quest 2. I am a legendary Dragon Slayer hero who is impervious to all weapons and is bathed in dragon blood. However, I won't mention it to my unfortunate senior. I'll remember to wash my feet. Kill Molly and Ein Mises and steal at least half of an immemorial dragon's blood. Complete the dragon blood ritual and strengthen your physical body's basic stats. System notification. If you choose this, you will reach the peak of melee combat with barbarians. Quest difficulty. Legend. Considering that you have Little Red's help, the difficulty will be greatly reduced. However, you will probably have to call her sister or mother in the future. I suddenly feel that this sounds really cool. I'll choose this one. Hunting quest 3. My dear distant relative, can we talk things over? Don't close the door. I'm really not borrowing money. I just want to borrow some blood. Hunt down a Titan Giant's clone and obtain the Titan Giant's heart and blood. Complete the baptism and greatly increase your basic stats and bloodline power. System notification. If you choose this evolution and complete it, the next step of evolution will require the blood of the Titan Giant's main body. Quest difficulty, semi-god. If you want to evolve further, the difficulty will be at least true god level. However, you get what you pay for. You understand. Alright then, no matter what I chose from this moment onward, I no longer looked at Zero as a senior but as a delicious piece of cake.